Turn the page for a sneak peek at the thrilling sequel to the Inheritance Games Chapter 1. Tell me again about the first time the two of you played chess in the park. Jameson's face was candlelit, but even in the scant light, I could see the gleam in his dark green eyes. There was nothing and no one that set Jameson Hawthorne's blood pumping like a mystery. It was right after my mother's funeral, I said. A few days, maybe a week. The two of us were in the tunnels beneath Hawthorne House alone, where no one else could hear us. It had been less than a month since I'd first stepped into the palatial Texas mansion, and a week since we'd solved the mystery of why I'd been brought there. If we'd truly solved that mystery. My mom and I used to go for walks in the park. I shut my eyes so that I could concentrate on the facts and not the intensity with which Jameson locked on to my every word. She called it the strolling aimlessly game. I steeled myself against the memory, letting my eyelids open. A few days after her funeral, I went to the park without her for the first time. When I got near the pond, I saw a crowd gathered. A man was lying on the sidewalk, eyes closed, covered in tattered blankets. Homeless. Jameson had heard all of this before, but his laser focus on me never wavered. People thought he was dead or passed out drunk. Then he sat up. I saw a police officer making his way through the crowd. "But you got to the man first," Jameson finished, his eyes on mine, his lips crooking upward. "And you asked him to play chess. I hadn't expected Harry to take me up on the offer, let alone win. We played every week after that," I said. "Sometimes twice a week, 3 times. He never told me more than his name. His name wasn't really Harry, he lied. And that was why I was in these tunnels with Jameson Hawthorne. That was why he'd started looking at me like I was a mystery again, a puzzle that he and only he could solve. It couldn't be a coincidence that billionaire Tobias Hawthorne had left his fortune to a stranger who knew his dead son." "You're sure that it was Toby?" Jameson asked, the air between us charged. These days, I was sure of little else. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been a normal girl, scraping by, desperately trying to survive high school, get a scholarship, and get out. Then out of the blue, I'd received word that one of the richest men in the country had died and named me in his will. Tobias Hawthorne had left me billions, very nearly his entire fortune, and I'd had no idea why. Jameson and I had spent 2 weeks unraveling the puzzles and clues the old man had left behind. Why me? Because of my name. Because of the day I was born. Because Tobias Hawthorne had bet everything on the long shot that somehow I could bring his splintered family back together. Or at least that was what the conclusion to the old man's last game had led us to believe. "I'm sure," I told Jameson fiercely. "Toby's alive. And if your grandfather knew that, and I know that's a big if, but if he did know, then we have to assume that either he chose me because I knew Toby, or he somehow masterminded bringing us together in the first place." If there was one thing I'd learned about deceased billionaire Tobias Hawthorne, it was that he was capable of orchestrating nearly anything, manipulating nearly anyone. He'd loved puzzles and riddles and games, just like Jameson. "What if that day in the park wasn't the first time you met my uncle?" Jameson took a step toward me, an unholy energy rolling off him. "Think about it, Eris. You said that the one time my grandfather met you, you were 6 years old and he saw you in the diner where your mother was a waitress. He heard your full name. Avery Grambs, rearranged, became a very risky gamble, the kind of name a man like Tobias Hawthorne would remember." "That's right," I said. Jameson was close to me now. Too close. Every one of the Hawthorne boys was magnetic, larger than life. They had an effect on people, and Jameson was very good at using that to get what he wanted. He wants something from me now. Why was my grandfather, a Texas billionaire with a whole host of private chefs on call, eating at a hole-in-the-wall diner in a small Connecticut town that no one's ever heard of? My mind raced. "You think he was looking for something?" Jameson smiled deviously. "Or someone. What if the old man went there looking for Toby and found you? There was something about the way he said the word you. Like I was someone, like I mattered. But Jameson and I had been down that road before. And everything else is a distraction, I asked, looking away from him. My name, the fact that Emily died on my birthday, the puzzle your grandfather left us, it was all just a lie. Jameson didn't react to the sound of Emily's name. In the throes of a mystery, nothing could distract him, not even her. A lie, Jameson repeated. Or misdirection. He reached to brush a strand of hair out of my face, and every nerve in my body went on high alert. I jerked back. Stop looking at me like that, I told him sternly. Like what? He countered. I folded my arms and stared him down. You turn on the charm when you want something. Heiress, you wound me. Jameson looked better smirking than anyone had a right to look. All I want is for you to rifle through your memory banks a little. My grandfather was a person who thought in 4 dimensions. He might have had more than one reason for choosing you. Why kill 2 birds with 1 stone, he always said, when you could kill 12. There was something about his voice, about the way he was still looking at me, that would have made it easy to get caught up in it all. The possibilities, the mystery, him. But I wasn't the kind of person who made the same mistake twice. Maybe you've got it wrong. I turned away from him. What if your grandfather didn't know that Toby was alive? What if Toby was the one who realized that the old man was watching me, considering leaving the entire fortune to me? Harry, as I'd known him, had been one hell of a chess player. Maybe that day in the park wasn't a coincidence. Maybe he'd sought me out. We're missing something, Jameson said, coming up to stand close behind me. Or maybe, he murmured directly into the back of my head, you're holding something back. He wasn't entirely wrong. I wasn't built to lay all my cards on the table, and Jameson Winchester Hawthorne didn't even pretend to be trustworthy. I see how it is, heiress. I could practically hear his crooked little grin. If that's how you want to play it, why don't we make this interesting? I turned back to face him. Eye to eye, it was hard not to remember that when Jameson kissed a girl, it wasn't tentative, it wasn't gentle, it wasn't real. I reminded myself. I'd been a part of the puzzle to him, a tool to be used. I was still a part of the puzzle. Not everything is a game, I said. And maybe, Jameson countered, eyes alight, that's the problem. Maybe that's why we're spinning our wheels in these tunnels day after day, rehashing this and getting nowhere. Because this isn't a game, yet a game has rules, a game has a winner. Maybe, heiress, what you and I need to solve the mystery of Toby Hawthorne is a little motivation. What kind of motivation? I narrowed my eyes at him. How about a wager? Jameson arched an eyebrow. If I figure all of this out first, then you have to forgive and forget my little lapse of judgment after we decoded the black wood. The black wood was where we'd figured out that his dead ex-girlfriend had died on my birthday. That was the moment when it had first become clear that Tobias Hawthorne hadn't chosen me because I was special. He'd chosen me for what it would do to them. Immediately afterward, Jameson had dropped me cold. And if I win, I countered, staring into those green eyes of his, then you have to forget that we ever kissed and never try to charm me into kissing you again. I didn't trust him, but I also didn't trust myself with him. Well then, heiress. Jameson stepped forward. Standing directly to my side, he brought his lips down to my ear and whispered, "Game on." Chapter 2, our wager struck. Jameson took off in one direction in the tunnels, and I went in another. Hawthorne House was massive, sprawling, big enough that, even after 3 weeks, I still hadn't seen it all. A person could spend years exploring this place and still not know all the ins and outs, all the secret passageways and hidden compartments, and that wasn't even counting the underground tunnels. Lucky for me, I was a quick learner. I cut from underneath the gymnasium wing to a tunnel that went below the music room. I passed beneath the solarium, then climbed a hidden staircase into the great room, where I found Nash Hawthorne leaning casually against a stone fireplace, waiting. "Hey, kid." Nash didn't bat an eye at the fact that I just appeared seemingly out of nowhere. In fact, The oldest Hawthorne brother gave the impression that the whole mansion could come crashing down around him, and he'd just keep leaning against that fireplace. Nash Hawthorne would probably tip his cowboy hat to Death herself. "Hey," I replied. "I don't suppose you've seen Grayson?" Nash asked, his Texas drawl making the question sound almost lazy. That did nothing to soften the impact of what he just said. "Nope." I kept my answer short and my face blank. Grayson Hawthorne and I had been keeping our distance. "And I don't suppose you know anything about a chat Gray had with our mother, right before she moved out." Sky Hawthorne, Tobias Hawthorne's younger daughter and the mother of all 4 Hawthorne grandsons, had tried to have me killed. The person who'd actually pulled the trigger was the one in a jail cell, but Sky had been forced to leave Hawthorne House by Grayson. "I will always protect you," he'd told me, "but it can't happen, Avery." "No clue," I said flatly, "didn't think so." Nash gave me a little wink. "Your sister and your lawyer are looking for you, East Wing." That was a loaded statement if I'd ever heard one. My lawyer was his ex-fiancée and my sister was. I didn't know what Libby and Nash Hawthorne were. "Thanks," I told him. But when I made my way up the winding staircase to the east wing of Hawthorne House, I didn't go looking for Libby or Alyssa. I'd made a bet with Jameson and I intended to win. First stop, Tobias Hawthorne's office. In the office, there was a mahogany desk, and behind the desk was a wall of trophies and patents and books with the name Hawthorne on the spine, a breathtaking visual reminder that there was nothing ordinary whatsoever about the Hawthorne brothers. They had been given every opportunity and the old man had expected them to be extraordinary. But I hadn't come here to gawk at trophies. Instead, I took a seat behind the desk and released the hidden compartment I discovered not long ago. It held a folder. Inside the folder there were pictures of me, countless photographs stretching back years. After that fateful meeting in the diner, Tobias Hawthorne had kept tabs on me. All because of my name, or did he have another motive? I thumbed through the photos and pulled out 2. Jameson had been right back in the tunnels. I was holding out on him. I'd been photographed with Toby twice, but both times all the photographer had captured of the man beside me was the back of his head. Had Tobias Hawthorne recognized Toby from behind? Had Harry realized we were being photographed and turned his head away from the camera on purpose? As far as clues went, this wasn't much to go on. All the file really proved was that Tobias Hawthorne had been keeping tabs on me for years before Harry had shown up. I thumbed past the photographs to a copy of my birth certificate. My mother's signature was neat, my father's an odd mix of cursive and print. Tobias Hawthorne had highlighted my father's signature, as well as my date of birth, 10/18. I knew the significance there. Both Grayson and Jameson had loved a girl named Emily Laughlin. Her death on October 18 had torn them apart. Somehow the old man had intended for me to bring them back together. But why would Tobias Hawthorne have highlighted my father's signature? Ricky Grambs was a deadbeat. He hadn't even cared enough to pick up the phone when my mother died. If it had been left up to him, I would have gone into foster care. Staring at Ricky's signature, I willed Tobias Hawthorne's reasoning in highlighting it to become clear. Nothing. In the back of my mind, I heard my mother's voice. "I have a secret," she'd told me, long before Tobias Hawthorne had written me into his will, "about the day you were born." Whatever she'd been referring to, I was never going to guess it now that she was gone. The one thing I knew for certain was that I wasn't a Hawthorne. If my father's name on that birth certificate weren't proof enough, a DNA test had already confirmed that I had no Hawthorne blood. Why did Toby seek me out? Did he seek me out? I thought about what Jameson had said about his grandfather killing 12 birds with one stone. Going back through the folder again, I tried to find some shred of meaning. What wasn't I seeing? There had to be something. A rap at the door was the only warning I got before the doorknob began to twist. Moving quickly, I gathered the photographs and slipped the file back into the hidden compartment. There you are. Alyssa Ortega, attorney at law, was a model of professionalism. She arched her brows into what I had mentally termed the Alyssa look. Would I be correct in assuming you've forgotten about the game? The game, I repeated, unsure which game she was talking about. I felt like I'd been playing since the moment I'd first stepped through the door of Hawthorne House. The football game, Alyssa clarified with another Alyssa look. Part 2 of your debut into Texas society. With Sky's exit from Hawthorne House, appearances are more important than ever. We need to control the narrative. This is a Cinderella story, not a scandal, and that means that you need to play Cinderella in public, as frequently and convincingly as possible, starting with making use of your owner's box tonight. Owner's box. That clicked. The game, I repeated again, comprehension dawning. As in an NFL game, because I own a football team. That was still so absolutely mind-blowing that I almost succeeded in distracting myself from the other part of what Alyssa had said, the bit about Sky. Per the deal I'd struck with Grayson, I couldn't tell anyone about his mother's part in my attempted murder. In exchange, he'd handled it, just like he'd promised he would. There are 48 seats in the owner's suite, Alyssa said, going into lecture mode. A general seat map is created months in advance. VIPs only. This isn't just football, it's a way of buying a seat at a dozen different tables. Invites are highly sought after by just about everyone: politicians, celebrities, CEOs. I've had Oren vet everyone on the list for tonight, and we'll have a professional photographer on hand for some strategic photo opportunities. Landon has crafted a press release that will go out an hour before the game. All that's left to worry about is, Alyssa trailed off delicately. I snorted. Me. This is a Cinderella story, Alyssa reminded me. What do you think Cinderella would wear to her first NFL game? That had to be a trick question. Something like this. Libby popped into the doorway. She was wearing a Lone Stars jersey with a matching scarf, matching gloves, and matching boots. Her blue hair was tied into pigtails with a thick bunch of blue and gold ribbons. Alyssa forced a smile. Yes, she told me. Something like that, minus the black lipstick, the black nail polish, and the choker. Libby was pretty much the world's most cheerful goth, and Alyssa was not a fan of my sister's sense of fashion. As I was saying, Alyssa continued emphatically, tonight is important. While Avery plays Cinderella for the cameras, I'll circulate among our guests and get a better sense of where they stand. Where they stand on what? I asked. I'd been told again and again that Tobias Hawthorne's will was ironclad. As far as I knew, the Hawthorne family had given up on trying to challenge it. It never hurts to have a few extra power players in your corner, Alyssa said, and we want our allies breathing easy. Hope I'm not interrupting. Nash acted like he'd just happened upon the three of us, like he wasn't the one who'd warned me that Alyssa and Libby were looking for me. Go on, Lily, he told my lawyer. You were saying something about breathing easy. We need people to know that Avery isn't here to shake things up. Alyssa avoided looking directly at Nash, like a person avoiding looking into the sun. Your grandfather had investments, business partners, political relationships. These things require a careful balance. What she means when she says that, Nash told me, is that she needs people to think that McNamara, Ortega, and Jones has the situation entirely under control. The situation, I thought, or me, I didn't relish the idea of being anyone's puppet. In theory, at least, the firm was supposed to work for me. That gave me an idea. Alyssa, do you remember when I asked you to get money to a friend of mine? Harry, wasn't it? Alyssa replied, but I got the distinct feeling that her attention was divided three ways. Between my question, her grand plans for the night, and the way Nash's lips ticked upward on the ends when he saw Libby's outfit. The last thing I needed my lawyer focused on was the way that her ex was looking at my sister. Yes. Were you able to get the money to him? I asked. The simplest way to get answers would be to track down Toby before Jameson did. Alyssa tore her eyes away from Libby and Nash. Unfortunately, she said briskly, my people have been unable to find a trace of your Harry. I rolled the implication of that over in my mind. Toby Hawthorne had appeared in the park days after my mother's death, and less than a month after I left, he was gone. "Now," Alyssa said, clasping her hands in front of her body, "about your wardrobe." Chapter 3. I had never seen a game of football in my life, but as the new owner of the Texas Lone Stars, I couldn't exactly say that to the crowd of reporters who mobbed the SUV when we pulled up to the stadium, any more than I could have admitted that the off-the-shoulder jersey and metallic blue cowboy boots I was wearing felt about as authentic as a Halloween costume. "Lower the window," Alyssa told me, smile and yell, "Go Lone Stars." I didn't want to lower the window. I didn't want to smile. I didn't want to yell anything, but I did it, because this was a Cinderella story and I was the star. "Avery, Avery, look over here. How are you feeling about your first game as the new owner? Do you have any comments about reports that you assaulted Sky Hawthorne?" I hadn't had much media training, but I'd had enough to know the cardinal rule of having reporters shout questions at you rapid fire. Don't answer. Pretty much the only thing I was allowed to say was that I was excited, grateful, awed, and overwhelmed in the most incredible possible way. So I did my best to channel excitement, gratitude, and awe. Nearly 100,000 people would attend the game tonight. Millions would watch it around the world, cheering for the team, my team. "Go Lone Stars," I yelled. I went to roll up my window, but just as my finger brushed the button, a figure pulled away from the crowd. Not a reporter, my father. Ricky Grambs had spent a lifetime treating me like an afterthought, if that. I hadn't seen him in more than a year, but now that I'd inherited billions, there he was. Turning away from him and the paparazzi, I rolled my window up. "Ave." Libby's voice was hesitant as our bulletproof SUV disappeared into a private parking garage beneath the stadium. My sister was an optimist. She believed the best of people, including a man who'd never done a damn thing for either one of us. "Did you know he'd be here?" I asked her, my voice low. "No," Libby said. "I swear," she caught her bottom lip between her teeth, smudging her black lipstick. "But he just wants to talk. I bet he does." Up in the driver's seat, Orrin, my head of security, parked the SUV and spoke calmly into his earpiece. "We have a situation near the north entrance. Eyes only, but I want a full report." The nice thing about being a billionaire with a security team brimming with retired special forces was that the chances of my being ambushed again were next to none. I shoved down the feelings that seeing Ricky had dredged up and stepped out of the car into the bowels of one of the biggest stadiums in the world. "Let's do this," I said. "For the record," Alyssa told me as she exited the car, "the firm is more than capable of handling your father." And that was the nice thing about being the sole client of a multi-billion-dollar law firm. "Are you okay?" Alyssa pressed. She wasn't exactly the touchy-feely type. More likely she was trying to assess whether I would be a liability tonight. "I'm fine," I said. "Why wouldn't she be?" That voice, low and smooth, came from an elevator behind me. For the first time in 7 days, I turned to look directly at Grayson Hawthorne. He had pale hair and ice-gray eyes and cheekbones sharp enough to count as weapons. 2 weeks ago, I would have said that he was the most self-assured, self-righteous, arrogant jerk I'd ever met. I wasn't sure what to say about Grayson Hawthorne now. "Why," he repeated crisply, stepping out of the elevator, "would Avery be anything other than fine?" "Deadbeat dad made an appearance outside," I muttered. "It's fine." Grayson stared at me, his eyes piercing mine, then turned to Orrin. "Is he a threat?" "I'll always protect you," he'd sworn. "But it can't happen, Avery." "I don't need you to protect me," I told Grayson sharply. "When it comes to Ricky, I'm an expert at protecting myself." I stalked past Grayson, into the elevator he'd stepped out of a moment earlier. The trick to being abandoned was to never let yourself long for anyone who left. A minute later, when the elevator doors opened into the owner's suite, I stepped out, Alyssa to one side and Orrin to the other, and I didn't so much as look back at Grayson. Since he'd taken the elevator down to meet me, he'd obviously already been up here, probably schmoozing, without me. Avery, you made it. Zara Hawthorne Caligaris wore a string of delicate pearls around her neck. There was something about her sharp-edged smile that made me feel like she could probably kill a man with those pearls if she were so inclined. I wasn't sure you would be putting in an appearance tonight, and you were ready to hold court in my absence, I concluded. I thought about what Alyssa had said about allies and power players, and the influence that could be bought with a ticket to this suite. As Jameson would say, game on. Kim Haynes' photography Jennifer Lynn Barnes is the New York Times best-selling author of more than 20 acclaimed young adult novels, including Little White Lies, Deadly Little Scandals, The Lovely and the Lost, and the Naturals series. The Naturals, Killer Instinct, All In, Bad Blood, and the e-novella 12. Jen is also a Fulbright scholar with advanced degrees in psychology, psychiatry, and cognitive science. She received her Ph.D. from Yale University in 2012 and is currently a professor of psychology and professional writing at the University of Oklahoma. You can find her online at Jennifer Lynn Barnes.com or follow her on Twitter at Jen Lynn Barnes. For Samuel, also by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, The Inheritance Games, The Hawthorne Legacy, The Naturals, Killer Instinct, All in Bad Blood 12. An e-novella, The Debutantes, Little White Lies, Deadly Little Scandals, The Lovely, and The Lost. Chapter 1. When I was a kid, my mom constantly invented games. The quiet game. The who can make their cookie last longer game. A perennial favorite, the marshmallow game involved eating marshmallows while wearing puffy Goodwill jackets indoors to avoid turning on the heat. The flashlight game was what we played when the electricity went out. We never walked anywhere, we raced. The floor was nearly always lava. The primary purpose of pillows was building forts. Our longest-lasting game was called I Have a Secret, because my mom said that everyone should always have at least one. Some days she guessed mine. Some days she didn't. We played every week, right up until I was 15 and one of her secrets landed her in the hospital. The next thing I knew, she was gone. Your move, princess. A gravelly voice dragged me back to the present. I don't have all day. Not a princess, I retorted, sliding one of my knights into place. Your move, old man. Harry scowled at me. I didn't know how old he was, really, and I had no idea how he'd come to be homeless and living in the park where we played chess each morning. I did know that he was a formidable opponent. You, he grumbled, eyeing the board, are a horrible person. 3 moves later, I had him. Checkmate. You know what that means, Harry. He gave me a dirty look. I have to let you buy me breakfast. Those were the terms of our long-standing bet. When I won, he couldn't turn down the free meal. To my credit, I only gloated a little. It's good to be queen. I made it to school on time, but barely. I had a habit of cutting things close. I walked the same tightrope with my grades. How little effort could I put in and still get an A? I wasn't lazy. I was practical. Picking up an extra shift was worth trading a 98 for a 92. I was in the middle of drafting an English paper in Spanish class when I was called to the office. Girls like me were supposed to be invisible. We didn't get summoned for sit-downs with the principal. We made exactly as much trouble as we could afford to make, which in my case was none. Avery. Principal Altman's greeting was not what one would call warm. Have a seat. I sat. He folded his hands on the desk between us. I assume you know why you're here. Unless this was about the weekly poker game I'd been running in the parking lot to finance Harry's breakfasts and sometimes my own, I had no idea what I'd done to draw the administration's attention. Sorry, I said, trying to sound sufficiently meek, but I don't. Principal Altman let me sit with my response for a moment, then presented me with a stapled packet of paper. This is the physics test you took yesterday. Okay, I said. That wasn't the response he was looking for, but it was all I had. For once, I'd actually studied. I couldn't imagine I'd done badly enough to merit intervention. Mr. Yates graded the tests, Avery. Yours was the only perfect score. Great, I said, in a deliberate effort to keep myself from saying okay again. Not great, young lady. Mr. Yates intentionally creates exams that challenge the abilities of his students. In 20 years, he's never given a perfect score. Do you see the problem? I couldn't quite bite back my instinctive reply. A teacher who designs tests most of his students can't pass. Mr. Altman narrowed his eyes. You're a good student, Avery. Quite good, given your circumstances. But you don't exactly have a history of setting the curve. That was fair, so why did I feel like he'd gut-punched me? I am not without sympathy for your situation, Principal Altman continued, but I need you to be straight with me here. He locked his eyes onto mine. Were you aware that Mr. Yates keeps copies of all his exams on the cloud? He thought I'd cheated. He was sitting there staring me down, and I'd never felt less seen. I'd like to help you, Avery. You've done extremely well given the hand life has dealt you. I would hate to see any plans you might have for the future derailed. Any plans I might have, I repeated. If I'd had a different last name, if I'd had a dad who was a dentist and a mom who stayed home, he wouldn't have acted like the future was something I might have thought about. I'm a junior, I gritted out. I'll graduate next year with at least 2 semesters worth of college credit. My test scores should put me in scholarship contention at UConn, which has one of the top actuarial science programs in the country. Mr. Altman frowned. Actuarial science, statistical risk assessment. It was the closest I could come to double majoring in poker and math. Besides, it was one of the most employable majors on the planet. Are you a fan of calculated risks, Ms. Grambs, like cheating? I couldn't let myself get any angrier. Instead, I pictured myself playing chess. I marked out the moves in my mind. Girls like me didn't get to explode. I didn't cheat, I said calmly. I studied. I'd scraped together time in other classes between shifts, later at night than I should have stayed up. Knowing that Mr. Yates was infamous for giving impossible tests had made me want to redefine possible. For once, instead of seeing how close I could cut it, I'd wanted to see how far I could go. And this was what I got for my effort because girls like me didn't ace impossible exams. I'll take the test again, I said, trying not to sound furious or worse, wounded. I'll get the same grade again. And what would you say if I told you that Mr. Yates had prepared a new exam, all new questions, every bit as difficult as the first? I didn't even hesitate. I'll take it. That can be arranged tomorrow during third period, but I have to warn you that this will go significantly better for you if now. Mr. Altman stared at me. Excuse me, forget sounding meek, forget being invisible. I want to take the new exam right here in your office right now. Chapter 2 Rough Day? Libby asked. My sister was 7 years older than me and way too empathetic for her own good or mine. I'm fine, I replied. Recounting my trip to Altman's office would only have worried her, and until Mr. Yates graded my second test, there was nothing anyone could do. I changed the subject. Tips were good tonight. How good? Libby's sense of style resided somewhere between punk and goth, but personality-wise, she was the kind of eternal optimist who believed $100 tip was always just around the corner at a hole-in-the-wall diner where most entrees cost $6.99. I pressed a wad of crumpled singles into her hand, good enough to help make rent. Libby tried to hand the money back, but I moved out of reach before she could. I will throw this cash at you, she warned sternly. I shrugged. I dodge. You're impossible. Libby grudgingly put the money away, produced a muffin tin out of nowhere, and fixed me with a look. You will accept this muffin to make it up to me. Yes, ma'am. I went to take it from her outstretched hand, but then I looked past her to the counter and realized she'd baked more than muffins. There were also cupcakes. I felt my stomach plummet. Oh no, Lib. It's not what you think, Libby promised. She was an apology cupcake baker, a guilty cupcake baker, a please don't be mad at me cupcake baker. Not what I think, I repeated softly. So he's not moving back in. It's going to be different this time, Libby promised. And the cupcakes are chocolate. My favorite. It's never going to be different, I said, but if I'd been capable of making her believe that, she'd have believed it already. Right on cue, Libby's on-again, off-again boyfriend who had a fondness for punching walls and extolling his own virtues for not punching Libby strolled in. He snagged a cupcake off the counter and let his gaze rake over me. Hey, jailbait. Drake, Libby said. I'm kidding. Drake smiled. You know I'm kidding, Libby mine. You and your sister just need to learn how to take a joke. 1 minute in and he was already making us the problem. This is not healthy, I told Libby. He hadn't wanted her to take me in and he'd never stopped punishing her for it. This is not your apartment, Drake shot back. Avery's my sister, Libby insisted. Half-sister, Drake corrected, and then he smiled again. Joking. He wasn't, but he also wasn't wrong. Libby and I shared an absent father but had different moms. We'd only seen each other once or twice a year growing up. No one had expected her to take custody of me 2 years earlier. She was young. She was barely scraping by, but she was Libby. Loving people was what she did. If Drake's staying here, I told her quietly, then I'm not. Libby picked up a cupcake and cradled it in her hands. I'm doing the best I can, Avery. She was a people pleaser. Drake liked putting her in the middle. He used me to hurt her. I couldn't just wait around for the day he stopped punching walls. If you need me, I told Libby, I'll be living in my car. Chapter 3. My ancient Pontiac was a piece of junk, but at least the heater worked. Mostly. I parked at the diner around the back where no one would see me. Libby texted, but I couldn't bring myself to text back, so I ended up just staring at my phone instead. The screen was cracked. My data plan was practically non-existent, so I couldn't go online, but I did have unlimited texts. Besides Libby, there was exactly one person in my life worth texting. I kept my message to Max short and sweet. You know who is back. There was no immediate response. Max's parents were big on phone-free time and confiscated hers frequently. They were also infamous for intermittently monitoring her messages, which was why I hadn't named Drake and wouldn't type a word about where I was spending the night. Neither the Liu family nor my social worker needed to know that I wasn't where I was supposed to be. Setting my phone down, I glanced at my backpack in the passenger seat, but decided that the rest of my homework could wait for morning. I laid my seat back and closed my eyes but couldn't sleep, so I reached into the glove box and retrieved the only thing of value that my mother had left me. A stack of postcards, dozens of them. Dozens of places we'd planned to go together. Hawaii, New Zealand, Machu Picchu. Staring at each of the pictures in turn, I imagined myself anywhere but here. Tokyo, Bali, Greece. I wasn't sure how long I'd been lost in thought when my phone beeped. I picked it up and was greeted by Max's response to my message about Drake. That motherfaxer. And then a moment later, are you okay? Max had moved away the summer after 8th grade. Most of our communication was written, and she refused to write curse words lest her parents see them, so she got creative. I'm fine, I wrote back, and that was all the impetus she needed to unleash her righteous fury on my behalf. That faxing chiffed can go straight to Elf and eat a bag of ducks. A second later, my phone rang. Are you really okay? Max asked when I answered. I looked back down at the postcards in my lap and the muscles in my throat tightened. I would make it through high school. I'd apply for every scholarship I qualified for. I'd get a marketable degree that allowed me to work remotely and paid me well. I'd travel the world. I let out a long, jagged breath and then answered Max's question. You know me, Maxine. I always land on my feet. Chapter 4. The next day, I paid a price for sleeping in my car. My whole body ached, and I had to shower after gym because paper towels in the bathroom at the diner could only go so far. I didn't have time to dry my hair, so I arrived at my next class sopping wet. It wasn't my best look, but I'd gone to school with the same kids my whole life. I was wallpaper. No one was looking. Romeo and Juliet is littered with proverbs, small, pithy bits of wisdom that make a statement about the way the world and human nature work. My English teacher was young and earnest, and I deeply suspected she'd had too much coffee. Let's take a step back from Shakespeare, who can give me an example of an everyday proverb. Beggars can't be choosers, I thought, my head pounding and water droplets dripping down my back. Necessity is the mother of invention. If wishes were horses, beggars would ride. The door to the classroom opened. An office aide waited for the teacher to look at her, then announced loudly enough for the whole class to hear, "Avery Grambs is wanted in the office." I took that to mean that someone had graded my test. I knew better than to expect an apology, but I also wasn't expecting Mr. Altman to meet me at his secretary's desk, beaming like he'd just had a visit from the Pope. Avery. An alarm went off in the back of my head because no one was ever that glad to see me. Right this way. He opened the door to his office, and I caught sight of a familiar neon blue ponytail inside. "Libby," I said. She was wearing skull-print scrubs and no makeup, both of which suggested she'd come straight from work. In the middle of a shift. Orderlies at assisted living facilities couldn't just walk out in the middle of shifts, not unless something was wrong. "Is Dad?" I couldn't make myself finish the question. "Your father is fine." The voice that issued that statement didn't belong to Libby or Principal Altman. My head whipped up and I looked past my sister. The chair behind the principal's desk was occupied by a guy not much older than me. What is going on here? He was wearing a suit. He looked like the kind of person who should have had an entourage. "As of yesterday," he continued, his low, rich voice measured and precise, "Ricky Grams was alive, well, and safely passed out in a motel room in Michigan, an hour outside of Detroit." I tried not to stare at him and failed. Light hair, pale eyes, features sharp enough to cut rocks. "How could you possibly know that?" I demanded. "I didn't even know where my deadbeat father was. How could he?" The boy in the suit didn't answer my question. Instead, he arched an eyebrow. "Principal Altman," he said. "If you could give us a moment." The principal opened his mouth, presumably to object to being removed from his own office, but the boy's eyebrow lifted higher. "I believe we had an agreement." Altman cleared his throat. "Of course." And just like that he turned and walked out the door. It closed behind him, and I resumed openly staring at the boy who'd banished him. "You asked how I know where your father is." His eyes were the same color as his suit, gray, bordering on silver. "It would be best for the moment for you to just assume that I know everything." His voice would have been pleasant to listen to if it weren't for the words. "A guy who thinks he knows everything," I muttered. "That's new." "A girl with a razor-sharp tongue," he returned, silver eyes focused on mine, the ends of his lips ticking upward. "Who are you?" I asked. "And what do you want with me?" Something inside me added. "What do you want with me?" "All I want," he said, "is to deliver a message." For reasons I couldn't quite pinpoint, my heart started beating faster. One that has proven rather difficult to send via traditional means. "That might be my fault," Libby volunteered sheepishly beside me. "What might be your fault?" I turned to look at her, grateful for an excuse to look away from gray eyes and fighting the urge to glance back. "The first thing you need to know," Libby said, as earnestly as anyone wearing skull-print scrubs had ever said anything, "is that I had no idea the letters were real." "What letters?" I asked. I was the only person in this room who didn't know what was going on here, and I couldn't shake the feeling that not knowing was a liability, like standing on train tracks but not knowing which direction the train was coming from. "Letters," the boy in the suit said, his voice wrapping around me, "that my grandfather's attorneys have been sending certified mail to your residence for the better part of 3 weeks. "I thought they were a scam," Libby told me. "I assure you," the boy replied silkily, "they are not." I knew better than to put any confidence in the assurances of good-looking guys. "Let me start again." He folded his hands on the desk between us, the thumb of his right hand lightly circling the cuff link on his left wrist. Name is Grayson Hawthorne. I'm here on behalf of McNamara, Ortega & Jones, a Dallas-based law firm representing my grandfather's estate. Grayson's pale eyes met mine. My grandfather passed away earlier this month. A weighty pause. His name was Tobias Hawthorne. Grayson studied my reaction, or more accurately, the lack thereof. Does that name mean anything to you? The sensation of standing on train tracks was back. No, I said. Should it? My grandfather was a very wealthy man, Ms. Grambs. And it appears that, along with our family and people who worked for him for years, you have been named in his will. I heard the words but couldn't process them. His what? His will, Grayson repeated, a slight smile crossing his lips. I don't know what he left you exactly, but your presence is required at the will's reading. We've been postponing it for weeks. I was an intelligent person, but Grayson Hawthorne might as well have been speaking Swedish. Why would your grandfather leave anything to me? I asked. Grayson stood. That's the question of the hour, isn't it? He stepped out from behind the desk, and suddenly I knew exactly what direction the train was coming from. His. I've taken the liberty of making travel arrangements on your behalf. This wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. What makes you think? I started to say, but Libby cut me off. Great, she said, giving me a healthy side-eye. Grayson smirked. I'll give you two a moment. His eyes lingered on mine too long for comfort, and then, without another word, he strode out the door. Libby and I were silent for a full 5 seconds after he was gone. Don't take this the wrong way, she whispered finally, but I think he might be God. I snorted. He certainly thinks so. It was easier to ignore the effect he'd had on me now that he was gone. What kind of person had self-assurance that absolute? It was there in every aspect of his posture and word choice, in every interaction. Power was as much a fact of life for this guy as gravity. The world bent to the will of Grayson Hawthorne. What money couldn't buy him, those eyes probably did. Start from the beginning, I told Libby, and don't leave anything out. She fidgeted with the inky black tips of her blue ponytail. A couple of weeks ago, we started getting these letters addressed to you, care of me. They said that you'd inherited money, gave us a number to call. I thought they were a scam. Like one of those emails that claims to be from a foreign prince. Why would this Tobias Hawthorne, a man I've never met, never even heard of, put me in his will? I asked. I don't know, Libby said, but that she gestured in the direction Grayson had gone is not a scam. Did you see the way he dealt with Principal Altman? What do you think their agreement was? A bribe or a threat? Both. Pushing down that response, I pulled out my phone and connected to the school's Wi-Fi. One internet search for Tobias Hawthorne later, the two of us were reading a news headline. Noted philanthropist dies at 78. Do you know what philanthropist means? Libby asked me seriously. It means rich. It means someone who gives to charity, I corrected her. So, rich. Libby gave me a look. What if you are charity? They wouldn't send this guy's grandson to get you if he just left you a few $100s. We must be talking thousands. You could travel, Avery, or put it toward college, or buy a better car. I could feel my heart starting to beat faster again. Why would a total stranger leave me anything? I reiterated, resisting the urge to daydream even for a second, because if I started, I wasn't sure I could stop. Maybe he knew your mom, Libby suggested. I don't know, but I do know that you need to go to the reading of that will. I can't just take off, I told her. Neither can you. We'd both miss work. I'd miss class. And yet, if nothing else, a trip would get Libby away from Drake, at least temporarily. And if this is real, it was already getting harder not to think about the possibilities. My shifts are covered for the next 2 days, Libby informed me. I made some calls, and so are yours. She reached for my hand. Come on, Ave, wouldn't it be nice to take a trip, just you and me? She squeezed my hand. After a moment, I squeezed back. Where exactly is the reading of the will? Texas. Libby grinned. And they didn't just book our tickets, they booked them first class. Chapter 5. I'd never flown before. Looking down from 10,000 feet, I could imagine myself going farther than Texas. Paris, Bali, Machu Picchu, those had always been someday dreams. But now, beside me, Libby was in heaven, sipping on a complimentary cocktail. "Picture time," she declared. "Smoosh in and hold up your warm nuts." On the other side of the aisle, a lady shot Libby a disapproving look. I wasn't sure whether the target of her disapproval was Libby's hair, the camel print jacket she'd changed into when she ditched her scrubs, her metal-studded choker, the selfie she was attempting to take, or the volume with which she just said the phrase "warm nuts." Adopting my haughtiest look, I leaned toward my sister and raised my warm nuts high. Libby laid her head on my shoulder and snapped the pic. She turned the phone to show me. "I'll send it to you when we land." The smile on her face wavered just for a second. "Don't put it online, okay? Drake doesn't know where you are, does he?" I bit back the urge to remind her that she was allowed to have a life. I didn't want to argue. "I won't." That wasn't any big sacrifice on my part. I had social media accounts, but I mostly used them to DM Max. And speaking of, I pulled my phone out. I'd put it in airplane mode, which meant no texting, but first class offered free Wi-Fi. I sent Max a quick update on what had happened, then spent the rest of the flight obsessively reading up on Tobias Hawthorne. He'd made his money in oil, then diversified. I'd expected, based on the way Grayson had said his grandfather was a wealthy man and the newspaper's use of the word philanthropist, that he was some kind of millionaire. I was wrong. Tobias Hawthorne wasn't just wealthy or well-off. There weren't any polite terms for what Tobias Hawthorne was, other than really insert expletive of your choice here, filthy rich. Billions, with a B in plural. He was the 9th richest person in the United States and the richest man in the state of Texas. $46.2 billion. That was his net worth. As far as numbers went, it didn't even sound real. Eventually, I stopped wondering why a man I'd never met would have left me something and started wondering how much. Max messaged back right before landing, "Are you foxing with me, Beach?" I grinned. "No, I am legit on a plane to Texas right now, getting ready to land." Max's only response was, "Holy ship." A dark-haired woman in an all-white power suit met Libby and me the second we stepped past security. "Ms. Grambs." She nodded to me, then to Libby as she added on a second identical greeting. "Ms. Grambs." She turned, expecting us to follow. To my chagrin, we both did. "I'm Alyssa Ortega," she said, "from McNamara, Ortega and Jones." Another pause, then she cast a sideways glance at me. "You are a very hard young woman to get a hold of." I shrugged. "I live in my car." "She doesn't live there," Libby said quickly. "Tell her you don't." "We're so glad you could make it." Alyssa Ortega from McNamara, Ortega and Jones didn't wait for me to tell her anything. I had the sense that my half of this conversation was perfunctory. "During your time in Texas, you're to consider yourselves guests of the Hawthorne family. I'll be your liaison to the firm. Anything you need while you're here, come to me." Don't lawyers bill by the hour? I thought. How much was this personal pickup costing the Hawthorne family? I didn't even consider the option that this woman might not be a lawyer. She looked to be in her late 20s. Talking to her gave me the same feeling as talking to Grayson Hawthorne. She was someone. "Is there anything I can do for you?" Alyssa Ortega asked, striding toward an automatic door, her pace not slowing at all when it seemed like the door might not open in time. I waited until I'd made sure she wasn't going to run smack into the glass before I replied. "How about some information? You'll have to be a bit more specific." "Do you know what's in the will?" I asked. "I do not." She gestured to a black sedan idling near the curb. She opened the back door for me. I slid in and Libby followed suit. Alyssa sat in the front passenger seat. The driver's seat was already occupied. I tried to see the driver but couldn't make out much of his face. "You'll find out what's in the will soon enough," Alyssa said, the words as crisp and neat as that dare the devil to ruin it white suit. "We all will. The reading is scheduled for shortly after your arrival at Hawthorne House." "Not the Hawthorne's house." Just Hawthorne House, like it was some kind of English manor complete with a name. Is that where we'll be staying? Libby asked. Hawthorne House. Our return tickets had been booked for tomorrow. We'd packed for an overnight. You'll have your pick of bedrooms, Alyssa assured us. Mr. Hawthorne bought the land the house is built on more than 50 years ago and spent every one of those years adding onto the architectural marvel he built there. I've lost track of the total number of bedrooms, but it's upward of 30. Hawthorne House is quite something. That was the most information we'd gotten out of her yet. I pressed my luck. I'm guessing Mr. Hawthorne was quite something too. Good guess, Alyssa said. She glanced back at me. Mr. Hawthorne was fond of good guessers. An eerie feeling washed over me then, almost like a premonition. Is that why he chose me? How well did you know him? Libby asked beside me. My father has been Tobias Hawthorne's attorney since before I was born. Alyssa Ortega wasn't power talking now. Her voice was soft. I spent a lot of time at Hawthorne House growing up. He wasn't just a client to her, I thought. Do you have any idea why I'm here? I asked. Why he'd leave me anything at all? Are you the world-saving type? Alyssa asked, like that was a perfectly ordinary question. No, I guessed. Ever had your life ruined by someone with the last name Hawthorne? Alyssa continued. I stared at her, then managed to answer more confidently this time. No, Alyssa smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Lucky you. Chapter 6. Hawthorne House sat on a hill. Massive, sprawling, it looked like a castle more suited to royalty than ranch country. There were a half-dozen cars parked out front and one beat-up motorcycle that looked like it should be dismantled and sold for parts. Alyssa eyed the bike. Looks like Nash made it home. Nash? Libby asked. The oldest Hawthorne grandson, Alyssa replied, tearing her gaze from the motorcycle and staring up at the castle. There are 4 of them total, 4 grandsons. I couldn't keep my mind from going back to the one Hawthorne I'd already met. Grayson, the perfectly tailored suit, the silvery gray eyes, the arrogance in the way he'd told me to assume he knew everything. Alyssa gave me a knowing look. Take it from someone who's both been there and done that. Never lose your heart to a Hawthorne. Don't worry, I told her, as annoyed with her assumption as I was with the fact that she'd been able to see any trace of my thoughts on my face. I keep mine under lock and key. The foyer was bigger than some houses, easily 1,000 square feet, like the person who had built it was afraid that the entryway might have to double as a place to host balls. Stone archways lined the foyer on either side, and the room stretched up 2 stories to an ornate ceiling, elaborately carved from wood. Even just looking up took my breath away. You've arrived. A familiar voice drew my attention back down to earth. And right on time. I trust there were no problems with your flight. Grayson Hawthorne was wearing a different suit now. This one was black, and so were his shirt and his tie. You, Alyssa greeted him with a steely-eyed look. I take it I'm not forgiven for interfering, Grayson asked. You're 19, Alyssa retorted. Would it kill you to act like it? It might. Grayson flashed his teeth in a smile. And you're welcome. It took me a second to realize that by interfering, Grayson meant coming to fetch me. Ladies, he said, may I take your coats? I'll keep mine, I replied, feeling contrary and like an extra layer between me and the rest of the world couldn't hurt. And yours? Grayson asked Libby smoothly. Still agog at the foyer, Libby shed her coat and handed it to him. Grayson walked underneath one of the stone arches. On the other side there was a corridor. Small square panels lined the wall. Grayson laid a hand on one panel and pushed. He turned his hand 90 degrees, pushed in the next panel, and then, in a motion too fast for me to decode, hit at least 2 others. I heard a pop and a door appeared, separating itself from the rest of the wall as it swung open. What the? I started to say. Grayson reached in and pulled out a hanger. Coat closet. That wasn't an explanation. It was a label, like this was any old coat closet in any old house. Alyssa took that as her cue to leave us in Grayson's capable hands, and I tried to summon up a response that wasn't just standing there with my mouth open like a fish. Grayson went to close the closet, but a sound from deep within stopped him. I heard a creak, then a bam. There was a shuffling sound back behind the coats, and then a figure in shadow pushed through them and stepped out into the light. A boy, maybe my age, maybe a little younger. He was wearing a suit, but that was where the similarities with Grayson ended. This boy's suit was rumpled like he'd taken a nap in it or 20. The jacket wasn't buttoned. The tie lying around his neck wasn't tied. He was tall but had a baby face and a mop of dark, curly hair. His eyes were light brown and so was his skin. "Am I late?" he asked Grayson. "One might suggest that you direct that query toward your watch." "Is Jameson here yet?" the dark-haired boy amended his question. Grayson stiffened. "No," the other boy grinned. "Then I'm not late." He looked past Grayson to Libby and me. "And these must be our guests. How rude of Grayson not to introduce us." A muscle in Grayson's jaw twitched. "Avery Grambs," he said formally, "and her sister, Libby. Ladies, this is my brother Alexander." For a moment it seemed like Grayson might leave it there, but then came the eyebrow arch. "Xander is the baby of the family." "I'm the handsome one," Xander corrected. "I know what you're thinking. This serious bugger beside me can really fill out an Armani suit. But I ask you, can he jolt the universe on and up to 10 with his smile, like a young Mary Tyler Moore incarnate in the body of a multiracial James Dean?" Xander seemed to have only one mode of speaking, fast. "No," he answered his own question. "No, he cannot." He finally stopped talking long enough for someone else to speak. "It's nice to meet you," Libby managed. "Spend a lot of time in coat closets?" I asked. Xander dusted his hands off on his pants. "Secret passage," he said, then attempted to dust off his pant legs with his hands. "This place is full of them." Chapter 7. My fingers itched to pull out my phone and start taking pictures, but I resisted. Libby had no such compunctions. "Mademoiselle," Xander sidestepped to block one of Libby's shots. "May I ask, what are your feelings on roller coasters?" I thought Libby's eyes might actually pop out of her head. "This place has a roller coaster." Xander grinned. "Not exactly." The next thing I knew, the baby of the Hawthorne family, who was 6'3" if he was an inch, was pulling my sister toward the back of the foyer. I was dumbfounded. How can a house not exactly have a roller coaster? Beside me, Grayson snorted. I caught him looking at me and narrowed my eyes. "What?" "Nothing," Grayson said, the tilt of his lips suggesting otherwise. "It's just, you have a very expressive face." No, I didn't. Libby was always saying that I was hard to read. My poker face had single-handedly been funding Harry's breakfasts for months. I wasn't expressive. There was nothing remarkable about my face. "I apologize for Xander," Grayson commented. "He tends not to buy into such antiquated notions as thinking before one speaks and sitting still for more than 3 consecutive seconds." He looked down. "He's the best of us, even on his worst days. Ms. Ortega said there were 4 of you." I couldn't help myself. I wanted to know more about this family, about him. 4 grandsons, I mean. "I have 3 brothers," Grayson told me. "Same mother, different fathers. Our Aunt Zara doesn't have any children." He looked past me. "And on the topic of my relations, I feel as though I should issue a second apology in advance." "Gray, darling." A woman swept up to us in a swirl of fabric and motion. Once her flowy shirt had settled around her, I tried to peg her age. "Older than 30, younger than 50. Beyond that I couldn't tell. They're ready for us in the great room," she told Grayson. "Or they will be shortly. Where's your brother?" Specificity, mother. The woman rolled her eyes. "Don't you mother me, Grayson Hawthorne." She turned to me. "You'd think he was born wearing that suit," she said with the air of someone confiding a great secret, "but Gray was my little streaker. A real free spirit. We couldn't keep clothes on him at all, really, until he was 4. Frankly, I didn't even try." She paused and assessed me without bothering to hide what she was doing. "You must be Avery," Grayson corrected. If he felt any embarrassment about his purported past as a toddler nudist, he didn't show it. "Her name is Avery, mother." The woman sighed but also smiled, like it was impossible for her to look at her son and not find herself utterly delighted in his presence. I always swore my children would call me by my first name, she told me. I'd raise them as my equals, you know. But then I always imagine having girls. 4 boys later, she gave the world's most elegant shrug. Objectively, Grayson's mother was over the top, but subjectively, she was infectious. Do you mind if I ask, dear, when is your birthday? The question took me by surprise. I had a mouth. It was fully functioning, but I couldn't keep up with her enough to reply. She put a hand on my cheek. Scorpio or Capricorn? Not a Pisces, clearly, mother, Grayson said, and then he corrected himself. Sky. It took me a moment to realize that must be her first name, and that he'd used it to humor her in an attempt to get her to stop astrologically cross-examining me. Grayson's a good boy, Sky told me. Too good. Then she winked at me. We'll talk. I doubt Ms. Grambs plans to stay long enough for a fireside chat or a tarot reading. A second woman, Sky's age or a little older, inserted herself into our conversation. If Sky was flowy fabric and oversharing, this woman was pencil skirts and pearls. I'm Zara Hawthorne Caligaris. She eyed me, the expression on her face as austere as her name. Do you mind if I ask how did you know my father? Silence descended on the cavernous foyer. I swallowed. I didn't. Beside me, I could feel Grayson staring again. After a small eternity, Zara offered me a tight smile. Well, we appreciate your presence. It's been a trying time these past few weeks, as I'm sure you can imagine. These past few weeks I filled in when no one could get a hold of me. Zara, a man with slick-back hair, interrupted us, slipping an arm around her waist. Mr. Ortega would like a word. The man who I took to be Zara's husband didn't spare so much as a glance for me. Sky made up for it and then some. My sister has words with people, she commented. I have conversations. Lovely conversations. Quite frankly, that's how I ended up with 4 sons. Wonderful, intimate conversations with 4 fascinating men. I will pay you to stop right there, Grayson said, a pained expression on his face. Sky patted her son's cheek. Bribe, threaten, buy out. You couldn't be more Hawthorne, darling, if you tried. She gave me a knowing smile. That's why we call him the heir apparent. There was something in Sky's voice, something about Grayson's expression when his mother said the phrase heir apparent, that made me think I had greatly underestimated just how much the Hawthorne family wanted that will read. They don't know what's in the will either. I suddenly felt like I'd stepped into an arena, utterly unaware of the rules of the game. Now, Sky said, looping one arm around me and one around Grayson, why don't we make our way to the great room? Chapter 8. The great room was 2/3 the size of the foyer. An enormous stone fireplace stood at the front. There were gargoyles carved into the sides of the fireplace. Literal gargoyles. Grayson deposited Libby and me into wingback chairs and then excused himself to the front of the room, where 3 older gentlemen in suits stood, talking to Zara and her husband. The lawyers, I realized. After another few minutes, Alyssa joined them, and I took stock of the other occupants of the room. A white couple, older, in their 60s at least. A black man, 40s, with a military bearing, who stood with his back to a wall and maintained a clear line of sight to both exits. Xander, with what was clearly another Hawthorne brother by his side. This one was older, mid-20s. He needed a haircut and had paired his suit with cowboy boots that, like the motorcycle outside, had seen better days. Nash, I thought, recalling the name that Alyssa had provided. Finally, an ancient woman joined the fray. Nash offered her an arm, but she took Xander's instead. He led her straight to Libby and me. This is Nan, he told us. The woman, the legend. Get on with you, she swatted his arm. I'm this rascal's great-grandmother. Nan settled with no small difficulty into the open seat beside me, older than dirt and twice as mean. She's a softy, Xander assured me cheerfully, and I'm her favorite. You are not my favorite, Nan grumbled. I'm everyone's favorite, Xander grinned. Far too much like that incorrigible grandfather of yours, Nan grunted. She closed her eyes and I saw her hands shake slightly. Awful man. There was a tenderness there. Was Mr. Hawthorne your son? Libby asked gently. She worked with the elderly and she was a good listener. Nan welcomed the opportunity to snort again. Son-in-law. He was also her favorite, Xander clarified. There was something poignant in the way he said it. This wasn't a funeral. They must have laid the man to rest weeks earlier, but I knew grief, could feel it, could practically smell it. Are you all right, Ave? Libby asked beside me. I thought back to Grayson telling me how expressive my face was. Better to think about Grayson Hawthorne than funerals and grieving. I'm fine, I told Libby, but I wasn't. Even after 2 years, missing my mom could hit me like a tsunami. I'm going to step outside, I said, forcing a smile. I just need some air. Zara's husband stopped me on my way out. Where are you going? We're about to start. He locked a hand over my elbow. I wrenched my arm out of his grasp. I didn't care who these people were. No one got to lay hands on me. I was told there are 4 Hawthorne grandsons, I said, my voice steely. By my count, you're still down by 1. I'll be back in a minute. You won't even notice I'm gone. I ended up in the backyard instead of the front, if you could even call it a yard. The grounds were immaculately kept. There was a fountain, a statue garden, a greenhouse, and stretching into the distance as far as I could see land. Some of it was treed, some was open, but it was easy enough, standing there and looking out, to imagine that a person who walked off to the horizon might never make their way back. If yes is no and once is never, then how many sides does a triangle have? The question came from above me. I looked up and saw a boy sitting on the edge of a balcony overhead, balanced precariously on a wrought iron railing. Drunk. You're going to fall, I told him. He smirked. An interesting proposition. That wasn't a proposition, I said. He offered me a lazy grin. There's no shame in propositioning a Hawthorne. He had hair darker than Grayson's and lighter than Xander's. He wasn't wearing a shirt. Always a good decision in the middle of winter, I thought acerbically, but I couldn't keep my gaze from traveling downward from his face. His torso was lean, his stomach defined. He had a long, thin scar that ran from collarbone to hip. You must be Mystery Girl, he said. I'm Avery, I corrected. I'd come out here to get away from the Hawthornes and their grief. There wasn't a trace of a care on this boy's face, like life was one grand lark. Like he wasn't grieving just as much as the people inside were. Whatever you say, MG, he retorted. Can I call you MG, Mystery Girl? I crossed my arms. No. He brought his feet up to the railing and stood. He wobbled, and I had a moment of chilling prescience. He's grieving and he's too high up. I hadn't allowed myself to self-destruct when my mom died. That didn't mean I hadn't felt the call. He shifted his weight to one foot and held the other out. Don't. Before I could say anything else, the boy twisted and grabbed the railing with his hands, holding himself vertical, feet in the air. I could see the muscles in his back tensing, rippling over his shoulder blades as he lowered himself and dropped. He landed right beside me. You shouldn't be out here, MG. I wasn't the shirtless one who just jumped off a balcony. Neither should you. I wondered if he could tell how fast my heart was beating. I wondered if his was racing at all. If I do what I should no more often than I say what I shouldn't, his lips twisted, then what does that make me? Jameson Hawthorne, I thought. Up close, I could make out the color of his eyes, a dark, fathomless green. What, he repeated intently, does that make me? I stopped looking at his eyes and his abs and his haphazardly gelled hair. Drunk, I said, and then, because I could sense an annoying comeback coming, I added 2 more words. And 2. What? Jameson Hawthorne said. The answer to your first riddle, I told him. If yes is no and once is never, then the number of sides a triangle has is 2. I drew out my reply, not bothering to explain how I'd arrived at my answer. Touché, MG. Jameson ambled past me, brushing his bare arm lightly over mine as he did. Touché. Chapter 9. I stayed out back a few minutes longer. Nothing about this day felt real. And tomorrow I'd go back to Connecticut, a little richer, hopefully, and with a story to tell, and I'd probably never see any of the Hawthornes again. I'd never have a view like this again. By the time I returned to the great room, Jameson Hawthorne had miraculously managed to find a shirt and a suit jacket. He smiled in my direction and gave a little salute. Beside him, Grayson stiffened, his jaw muscles tensing. "Now that everyone is here," one of the lawyers said, "let's get started." The three lawyers stood in triangle formation. The one who'd spoken shared Alice's dark hair, brown skin, and self-assured expression. I assumed he was the Ortega and McNamara, Ortega and Jones. The other two, presumably Jones and McNamara, stood to either side. Since when does it take 4 lawyers to read a will? I thought. "You are here," Mr. Ortega said, projecting his voice to the corners of the room, "to hear the last will and testament of Tobias Hawthorne. Per Mr. Hawthorne's instructions, my colleagues will now distribute letters he has left for each of you." The other men began to make the rounds of the room, handing out envelopes one by one. "You may open these letters when the reading is concluded." I was handed an envelope. My full name was written in calligraphy on the front. Beside me, Libby looked up at the lawyer, but he passed over her and went on delivering envelopes to the other occupants of the room. Mr. Hawthorne stipulated that all of the following individuals must be physically present for the reading of this will: Sky Hawthorne, Zara Hawthorne Caligaris, Nash Hawthorne, Grayson Hawthorne, Jameson Hawthorne, Alexander Hawthorne, and Ms. Avery Grambs of Newcastle, Connecticut. I felt about as conspicuous as I would have if I'd looked down and discovered that I wasn't wearing clothes. "Since you are all here," Mr. Ortega continued, "we may begin." Beside me, Libby slipped her hand into mine. "I, Tobias Hawthorne," Mr. Ortega read, "being of sound body and mind, decree that my worldly possessions, including all monetary and physical assets, be disposed of as follows. To Andrew and Lottie Laughlin, for years of loyal service, I bequeath a sum of $100,000 apiece, with lifelong, rent-free tenancy granted in Wayback Cottage, located on the western border of my Texas estate." The older couple I'd seen earlier leaned into each other. All I could think was, $100,000. The Laughlins' presence wasn't mandatory for the reading of the will, and they'd just been given $100,000 apiece. I tried very hard to remember how to breathe. To John Oren, head of my security detail, who has saved my life more times and in more ways than I can count, I leave the contents of my toolbox, held currently in the offices of McNamara, Ortega, and Jones, as well as a sum of $300,000. Tobias Hawthorne knew these people, I told myself, heart thumping. They worked for him. They mattered to him. I'm nothing. My mother-in-law, Pearl O'Day, I leave an annuity of $100,000 a year, plus a trust for medical expenses as set forth in the appendix. All jewelry belonging to my late wife, Alice O'Day Hawthorne, shall pass to her mother upon my death, to be distributed as she sees fit upon hers. Nan harumphed. "Don't you go getting any ideas," she ordered the room at large. "I'm going to outlive you all." Mr. Ortega smiled, but then that smile faltered. He paused and then tried again. "To my daughters, Zara Hawthorne Caligaris and Sky Hawthorne, I leave the funds necessary to pay off all debts accrued as of the date and time of my death." Mr. Ortega paused again, his lips pushing themselves together. The other 2 lawyers stared straight ahead, avoiding looking at any member of the Hawthorne family directly. "Additionally, I leave to Sky my compass, may she always know true north, and to Zara I leave my wedding ring, may she love as wholly and steadfastly as I loved her mother." Another pause, more painful than the last. "Go on." That came from Zara's husband. "To each of my daughters," Mr. Ortega read slowly, "beyond that already stated, I leave a one-time inheritance of $50,000. $50,000. I'd no sooner thought those words than Zara's husband echoed them out loud, irate. Tobias Hawthorne left his daughters less than he left his security detail. Suddenly, Sky's reference to Grayson as the heir apparent took on a whole new meaning. You did this. Zara turned toward Sky. She didn't raise her voice, but it was deadly all the same. Me, Sky said, indignant. Daddy was never the same after Toby died, Zara continued. Disappeared, Sky corrected. God listened to you. Zara lost her hold on her tone. You got in his head, didn't you, Sky? Batted your eyelashes and convinced him to bypass us and leave everything to your sons. Sky's voice was crisp. The word you're looking for is sons. The word she's looking for is bastards. Nash Hawthorne had the thickest Texas accent of anyone in the room. Not like we haven't heard it before. If I'd had a son, Zara's voice caught. But you didn't. Sky let that sink in. Did you, Zara? Enough. Zara's husband stepped in. We will sort this out. I'm afraid there's nothing to be sorted. Mr. Ortega re-entered the fray. You will find the will is ironclad with significant disincentives to any who might be tempted to challenge it. I translated that to mean, roughly, shut up and sit down. Now if I may continue, Mr. Ortega looked back down at the will in his hands. To my grandsons, Nash Westbrook Hawthorne, Grayson Davenport Hawthorne, Jameson Winchester Hawthorne, and Alexander Blackwood Hawthorne, I leave everything, Zara muttered bitterly. Mr. Ortega spoke over her. $250,000 apiece, payable on their 25th birthdays until such time to be managed by Alisa Ortega, trustee. What? Alisa sounded shocked. I mean what? The hell, Nash told her pleasantly. The phrase you're looking for, darlin', is what the hell. Tobias Hawthorne hadn't left everything to his grandsons. Given the scope of his fortune, he'd left them a pittance. What is going on here? Grayson asked, each word deadly and precise. Tobias Hawthorne didn't leave everything to his grandsons. He didn't leave everything to his daughters. My brain ground to a halt right there. My ears rang. Please, everyone, Mr. Ortega held up a hand. Allow me to finish. $46.2 billion, I thought, my heart attacking my rib cage and my mouth sandpaper dry. Tobias Hawthorne was worth $46.2 billion, and he left his grandsons $1 million combined. 100,000 total to his daughters. Another $500,000 to his servants, an annuity for Nan. The math in this equation did not add up. It couldn't add up. One by one, the other occupants of the room turned to stare at me. The remainder of my estate, Mr. Ortega read, including all properties, monetary assets, and worldly possessions not otherwise specified, I leave to Avery Grambs. Chapter 10, This is not happening. This cannot be happening. I'm dreaming. I'm delusional. He left everything to her. Sky's voice was shrill enough to break through my stupor. Why? Gone was the woman who'd mused about my astrological sign and regaled me with tales of her sons and lovers. This Sky looked like she could kill someone, literally. Who the hell is she? Zara's voice was knife-edged and clear as a bell. There must be some mistake. Grayson spoke like a person used to dealing with mistakes. Bribe, threaten, buy out, I thought. What would the heir apparent do to me? This is not happening. I felt that with every beat of my heart, every breath in, every breath out. This cannot be happening. He's right. My words came out in a whisper, lost to voices being raised all around me. I tried again, louder. Grayson's right. Heads started turning in my direction. There must be some mistake. My voice was hoarse. I felt like I'd just jumped out of a plane, like I was skydiving and waiting for my chute to open. This is not real. It can't be. Avery. Libby nudged me in the ribs, clearly telegraphing that I should shut up and stop talking about mistakes. But there was no way. There had to have been some kind of mix-up. A man I'd never met hadn't just left me a multi-billion-dollar fortune. Things like that didn't happen, period. You see, Sky latched on to what I'd said. Even Ava agrees this is ridiculous. This time, I was pretty sure she'd gotten my name wrong on purpose. The remainder of my estate, including all properties, monetary assets, and worldly possessions not otherwise specified, I leave to Avery Grambs. Sky Hawthorne knew my name now. They all did. I assure you there is no mistake. Mr. Ortega met my gaze, then turned his attention to the others. And I assure the rest of you, Tobias Hawthorne's last will and testament is utterly unbreakable. Since the majority of the remaining details concern only Avery, we'll cease with the dramatics. But let me make one thing very clear. Per the terms of the will, any heir who challenges Avery's inheritance will forfeit their share of the estate entirely. Avery's inheritance. I felt dizzy, almost nauseous. It was like someone had snapped their fingers and rewritten the laws of physics, like the coefficient of gravity had changed, and my body was ill-suited to coping. The world was spinning off its axis. "No will is that ironclad," Zara's husband said, his voice acidic. "Not when there's this kind of money at stake." "Spoken," Nash Hawthorne interjected, like someone who didn't really know the old man. "Traps upon traps," Jameson murmured, "and riddles upon riddles." I could feel his dark green eyes on mine. "I think you should leave," Grayson told me curtly, not a request, an order. Technically, Alisa Ortega sounded like she just swallowed arsenic. It's her house. Clearly, she really hadn't known what was in the will. She'd been kept in the dark, just like the family. How could Tobias Hawthorne blindside them like this? What kind of person does that to their own flesh and blood? "I don't understand," I said out loud, dizzy and numb, because none of this made any kind of sense. "My daughter is correct." Mr. Ortega kept his tone neutral. "You own it all, Ms. Grambs. Not just the fortune, but all of Mr. Hawthorne's properties, including Hawthorne House. Per the terms of your inheritance, which I will gladly go over with you, the current occupants have been granted tenancy unless and until they give you cause for removal." He let those words hang in the air. "Under no circumstances," he continued gravely, his words rife with warning, "can those tenants attempt to remove you." The room was suddenly silent and still. "They're going to kill me. Someone in this room is actually going to kill me." The man I'd pegged as former military strode to stand between me and Tobias Hawthorne's family. He said nothing, crossing his arms over his chest, keeping me behind him and the rest of them in his sight. "Orrin," Zara sounded shocked. "You work for this family." "I worked for Mr. Hawthorne." John Orrin paused and held up a piece of paper. It took me a moment to realize that it was his letter. It was his last request that I continue in the employment of Ms. Avery Grambs. He glanced at me. "Security, you'll need it. And not just to protect you from us," Xander added to my left. "Take a step back, please," Orrin ordered. Xander held his hands up. "Peace," he declared. "I make dire predictions in peace." "Zan's right." Jameson smiled like this was all a game. "The entire world's going to want a piece of you, mystery girl. This has story of the century written all over it. Story of the century." My brain kicked back into gear because there was every indication that this wasn't a joke. I wasn't delusional. I wasn't dreaming. I was an heiress. Chapter 11, I bolted. The next thing I knew, I was outside. The front door of Hawthorne House slammed behind me. Cool air hit my face. I was almost sure I was breathing, but my entire body felt distant and numb. Was this what shock felt like? "Avery," Libby burst out of the house after me. "Are you okay?" She studied me, concerned. "Also, are you insane? When someone gives you money, you don't try to give it back." "You do," I pointed out, the roar in my brain so loud that I couldn't hear myself think. "Every time I try to give you my tips." "We're not talking tips here." Libby's blue hair was falling out of her ponytail. "We're talking millions." "Billions," I corrected silently, but my mouth flat out refused to say the word. "Ave." Libby put a hand on my shoulder. "Think about what this means. You'll never have to worry about money again. You can buy whatever you want, do whatever you want. Those postcards you kept of your mom's." She leaned forward, touching her forehead against mine. "You can go anywhere. Imagine the possibilities." I did, even though this felt like a cruel joke, like the universe's way of tricking me into wanting things that girls like me were never meant to. The massive front door of Hawthorne House slammed open. I jumped back, and Nash Hawthorne stepped out. Even wearing a suit, he looked every inch the cowboy, ready to meet a rival at high noon. I braced myself. Billions, wars had been fought over less. "Relax, kid." Nash's Texas drawl was slow and smooth like whiskey. "I don't want the money, never have. Far as I'm concerned, this is the universe having a bit of fun with folks who probably deserve it." The oldest Hawthorne brother's gaze drifted from me to Libby. He was tall, muscular, and suntanned. She was tiny and slight, her pale skin standing in stark contrast to her dark lipstick and neon hair. The two of them looked like they didn't belong within 10 feet of each other, and yet there he was, slow smiling at her. "You take care, darlin'," Nash told my sister. He ambled toward his motorcycle, then put on his helmet, and a moment later he was gone. Libby stared after the motorcycle. "I take back what I said about Grayson. Maybe he's God." Right now we had bigger issues than which of the Hawthorne brothers was divine. "We can't stay here, Libby. I doubt the rest of the family is as blasé about the will as Nash is. We need to go." "I'm going with you," a deep voice said. I turned. John Orrin stood next to the front door. I hadn't heard him open it. "I don't need security," I told him. "I just need to get out of here." "You'll need security for the rest of your life." He was so matter-of-fact, I couldn't even begin to argue. "But look on the bright side." He nodded to the car that had picked us up at the airport. "I also drive." I asked Orrin to take us to a motel. Instead, he drove us to the fanciest hotel I'd ever seen, and he must have taken the scenic route because Alissa Ortega was waiting for us in the lobby. I've had a chance to read the will in full. Apparently that was her version of hello. "I brought a copy for you. I suggest we retire to your rooms and go over the details." "Our rooms," I repeated. The doormen were wearing tuxedos. There were 6 chandeliers in the lobby. Nearby, a woman was playing a 5-foot-tall harp. "We can't afford rooms here." Alissa gave me an almost pitying look. "Oh, honey," she said, then recovered her professionalism. "You own this hotel." "I what?" Libby and I were getting who let the rabble in. Looks from other patrons just standing in the lobby. "I could not possibly own this hotel. Besides which," Alissa continued, "the will is now in probate. It may be some time before the money and properties are out of escrow, but in the meantime, McNamara, Ortega, and Jones will be picking up the tab for anything you need." Libby frowned, crinkling her brow. "Is that a thing that law firms do?" "You have probably gathered that Mr. Hawthorne was one of our most important clients," Alissa said delicately. "It would be more precise to say that he was our only client. And now," I said, the truth sinking in, "that client is me." It took me almost an hour to read and reread and re-reread the will. Tobias Hawthorne had put only one condition on my inheritance. "You're to live in Hawthorne House for 1 year, commencing no more than 3 days from now." Alissa had made that point at least twice already, but I couldn't get my brain to accept it. The only string attached to my inheriting billions of dollars is that I must move into a mansion. Correct. A mansion where a large number of the people who were expecting to inherit this money still live, and I can't kick them out. Barring extraordinary circumstances, also correct. If it's any consolation, it is a very large house. "And if I refuse?" I asked. "Or if the Hawthorne family has me killed?" "No one is going to have you killed," Alissa said calmly. "I know you grew up around these people and everything," Libby told Alissa, trying to be diplomatic, "but they are totally 100% going to go all Lizzie Borden on my sister." "Really would prefer not to be axe-murdered," I emphasized. "Risk assessment low," Orrin rumbled, "at least insofar as axes are concerned." It took me a second to figure out that he was joking. "This is serious." "Believe me," he returned, "I know. But I also know the Hawthorne family. The boys would never harm a woman, and the women will come for you in the courtroom. No axes involved." "Besides," Alissa added, "in the state of Texas, if an heir dies while a will is in probate, the inheritance doesn't revert to the original estate, it becomes part of the heir's estate." "I have an estate," I thought dully. And if I refuse to move in with them? I asked again, a giant ball in my throat. She's not going to refuse. Libby shot laser eyes in my direction. If you fail to move into Hawthorne House in 3 days' time, Alyssa told me, your portion of the estate will be dispersed to charity. Not to Tobias Hawthorne's family, I asked. No, Alyce's neutral mask slipped slightly. She'd known the Hawthornes for years. She might work for me now, but she couldn't be happy about that, could she? Your father wrote the will, right? I said, trying to wrap my head around the insane situation I was in. In consultation with the other partners at the firm, Alyssa confirmed. Did he tell you? I tried to find a better way to phrase what I wanted to ask, then gave up. Did he tell you why? Why had Tobias Hawthorne disinherited his family? Why leave everything to me? I don't think my father knows why, Alyssa said. She peered at me, the neutral mask slipping once more. Do you? Chapter 12, Mother-faxing elf, Max breathed. Goat dram, mother-faxing elf. She lowered her voice to a whisper and let out an actual expletive. It was past midnight for me and 2 hours earlier for her. I half expected Mrs. Liu to sweep in and snatch the phone away, but nothing happened. How? Max demanded. Why? I looked down at the letter in my lap. Tobias Hawthorne had left me an explanation, but in the hours since the will was read, I hadn't been able to bring myself to open the envelope. I was alone, sitting in the dark on the balcony of the penthouse suite of a hotel that I owned, wearing a plush, floor-length robe that probably cost more than my car, and I was frozen. Maybe, Max said thoughtfully, you were switched at birth. Max watched a lot of television and had what could probably have been classified as a book addiction. Maybe your mother saved his life years ago. Maybe he owes his entire fortune to your great-great-grandfather. Maybe you were selected via an advanced computer algorithm that is poised to develop artificial intelligence any day. Maxine, I snorted. Somehow that was enough to allow me to say the exact words I'd been trying not to think. Maybe my father isn't really my father. That was the most rational explanation, wasn't it? Maybe Tobias Hawthorne hadn't disinherited his family for a stranger. Maybe I was family. I have a secret. I pictured my mom in my mind. How many times had I heard her say those exact words? You okay? Max asked on the other end of the line. I looked down at the envelope at my name in calligraphy on the front. I swallowed. Tobias Hawthorne left me a letter. And you haven't opened it yet, Max said. Avery, for fox's sakes, Maxine. Even over the phone, I could hear Max's mom in the background. Fox, Mama, I said fox. As in for the sake of foxes and their furry little tails. There was a brief pause and then, Avery. I have to go, my stomach muscles tight. Talk soon. Very soon, Max promised. And in the meantime, open the letter. She hung up. I hung up. I put my thumb underneath the lip of the envelope, but a knock at the door saved me from following through. Back in the suite, I found Orrin positioned at the door. Who is it? I asked him. Grayson Hawthorne, Orrin replied. I stared at the door and Orrin elaborated. If my men considered him a threat, he never would have made it to our floor. I trust Grayson, but if you don't want to see him. No, I said. What am I doing? It was late and I doubted American royalty took kindly to being dethroned. But there was something about the way Grayson had looked at me from the first time we'd met. Open the door, I told Orrin. He did, and then he stepped back. Aren't you going to invite me in? Grayson wasn't the heir anymore, but you wouldn't have known it from his tone. You shouldn't be here, I told him, pulling my robe tighter around me. I've spent the past hour telling myself much the same thing, and yet here I am. His eyes were pools of gray, his hair unkempt, like I wasn't the only one who hadn't been able to sleep. He'd lost everything today. Grayson, I said, I don't know how you did this. He cut me off, his voice dangerous and soft. I don't know what hold you had over my grandfather or what kind of con you're running here. I'm talking right now, Ms. Grambs. He placed his hand flat on the door. I'd been wrong about his eyes. They weren't pools, they were ice. I haven't a clue how you pulled this off, but I will find out. I see you now. I know what you are and what you're capable of, and there is nothing I wouldn't do to protect my family. Whatever game you're playing here, no matter how long this con, I will find the truth, and God help you when I do." Orrin stepped into my peripheral vision, but I didn't wait for him to act. I pushed the door forward hard enough to send Grayson back, then slammed it closed. Heart pounding, I waited for him to knock again, to shout through the door. Nothing. Slowly my head bowed, my eyes drawn like magnet to metal by the envelope in my hands. With one last glance at Orrin, I retreated to my bedroom. Open. The letter. This time I did it, removing a card from the envelope. The body of the message was only 2 words long. I stared at the page, reading the salutation, the message, and the signature over and over again. "Dearest Avery, I'm sorry. TTH Chapter 13 sorry. Sorry for what?" The question was still ringing in my mind the next morning. For once in my life I'd slept late. I found Orrin and Alyssa in our suite's kitchen talking softly, too softly for me to hear. "Avery." Orrin noticed me first. I wondered if he'd told Alyssa about Grayson. "There are some security protocols I'd like to go over with you, like not opening doors to Grayson Hawthorne. You're a target now," Alyssa told me crisply. Given that she'd been so insistent that the Hawthornes weren't a threat, I had to ask, "A target for what?" "Paparazzi, of course. The firm is keeping a lid on the story for the time being, but that won't last, and there are other concerns." "Kidnapping." Orrin didn't put any particular emphasis on that word. "Stalking." "People will make threats, they always do. You're young and you're female, and that will make it worse. With your sister's permission, I'll arrange a detail for her as well as soon as she gets back." Kidnapping, stalking, threats. I couldn't even wrap my mind around the words. "Where is Libby?" I asked, since he'd made reference to her coming back. "On a plane," Alyssa answered. "Specifically your plane." "I have a plane." I was never going to get used to this. "You have several," Alyssa told me. "And a helicopter, I believe, but that's neither here nor there. Your sister is en route to retrieve your things as well as her own. Given the deadline for your move into Hawthorne House and the stakes, we thought it best that you remain here. Ideally, we'll have you moved in no later than tonight." "The second this news gets out," Orrin said seriously, "you will be on the cover of every newspaper. You'll be the leading story on every newscast, the #1 trending topic on all social media. To some people you'll be Cinderella, to others Marie Antoinette. Some people would want to be me. Some people would hate me to the depths of their souls." For the first time, I noticed the gun holstered to Orrin's side. "It's best you sit tight," Orrin said evenly. "Your sister should be back tonight." For the rest of the morning, Alyssa and I played what I had mentally termed the uprooting Avery's life in an instant game. I quit my job. Alyssa took care of withdrawing me from school. "What about my car?" I asked. "Orrin will be driving you for the foreseeable future, but we can have your vehicle shipped if you would like," Alyssa offered. "Or you can pick out a new car for personal use." For all the emphasis she put on that, you would have thought she was talking about buying gum at the supermarket. "Do you prefer sedans or SUVs?" she queried, holding her phone in a way that suggested she was fully capable of ordering a car with a mere click of a button. "Any color preference." "You're going to have to excuse me for a second," I told her. I ducked back into my bedroom. The bed was piled ridiculously high with pillows. I climbed up on the bed, let myself fall back on the mountain of pillows, and pulled out my phone. Texting, calling, and DMing Max all led to the same result: nothing. She had definitely had her phone confiscated and possibly her laptop, which meant that she couldn't advise me on the appropriate response when one's lawyer started talking about ordering a car like it was a foxing pizza. This is unreal. Less than 24 hours earlier, I'd been sleeping in a parking lot. The closest I'd come to splurging was the occasional breakfast sandwich. Breakfast sandwich, I thought. Harry. I sat up in bed. "Alyssa," I called. If I didn't want a new car, if I wanted to spend that money on something else, could I? bankrolling a place for Harry to stay and getting him to accept it wouldn't be easy, but Alyssa told me to consider it handled. That was the world I lived in now. All I had to do was speak and it was handled. This wouldn't last. It couldn't. Sooner or later, someone would figure out that this was some kind of screw-up, so I might as well enjoy it while it lasts. That was the #1 thought on my mind when we went to pick up Libby. As my sister stepped out of my private jet, I wondered if Alyssa could get her into the Sorbonne, or buy her a little cupcake shop, or Libby. Every thought in my head came screeching to a halt the moment I saw her face. Her right eye was bruised and swollen nearly shut. Libby swallowed but didn't avert her eyes. If you say, "I told you so," I will make butterscotch cupcakes and guilt you into eating them every day. Is there a problem I should know about? Alyssa asked Libby, her voice deceptively calm as she eyed the bruise. Avery hates butterscotch, Libby said like that was the problem. Alyssa, I gritted out, does your law firm have a hit man on retainer? No, Alyssa kept her tone strictly professional, but I'm very resourceful. I could make some inquiries. I legitimately cannot tell if you are joking, Libby said, and then she turned to me. I don't want to talk about it, and I'm fine. I'm fine. I managed to keep my mouth shut, and all of us managed to make it back to the hotel. The plan was to finish up a few final arrangements and leave immediately for Hawthorne House. Things did not go exactly according to plan. We have a problem. Oren didn't sound overly bothered, but Alyssa immediately put down her phone. Oren nodded to our suite's balcony. Alyssa stepped outside, looked down, and swore. I pushed past Oren and went out on the balcony to see what was going on. Down below, outside the hotel's entrance, hotel security guards were struggling with what appeared to be a mob. It wasn't until a flash went off that I realized what that mob was: paparazzi. And just like that, every camera was pointed up at the balcony. At me. Chapter 14, I thought you said your firm had this locked down. Oren gave Alyssa a look. She scowled back at him, made 3 phone calls in quick succession, 2 of them in Spanish, and then turned back to my head of security. It didn't come from us. Her eyes darted toward Libby. It came from your boyfriend. Libby's answer was barely more than a whisper. My ex. I'm sorry. Libby had apologized at least a dozen times. She told Drake everything about the will, the conditions on my inheritance, where we were staying, everything. I knew her well enough to know why. He would have been angry that she'd taken off. She would have tried to pacify him. And the moment she'd told him about the money, he would have demanded to tag along. He would have started making plans to spend the Hawthorne money. And Libby, God bless her, would have told him that it wasn't theirs to spend, that it wasn't his. He hit her. She left him. He went to the press, and now they were here. A horde descended on us as Oren led me out a side door. There she is, a voice yelled. Avery, Avery, over here. Avery, how does it feel to be the richest teenager in America? How does it feel to be the world's youngest billionaire? How did you know Tobias Hawthorne? Is it true that you're Tobias Hawthorne's illegitimate daughter? I was shuffled into an SUV. The door closed, dulling the roar of the reporter's questions. Exactly halfway through our drive, I got a text, not from Max, from an unknown number. I opened it and saw a screenshot of a news headline. Avery Grambs, who is the Hawthorne heiress? A short message accompanied the picture. Hey, mystery girl, you're officially famous. There were more paparazzi outside the gates of Hawthorne House, but once we pulled past them, the rest of the world faded away. There was no welcome party. No Jameson. No Grayson. No Hawthornes of any kind. I reached for the massive front door locked. Alyssa disappeared around the back of the house. When she finally reappeared, there was a pained expression on her face. She handed me a large envelope. Legally, she said, the Hawthorne family is required to provide you with keys, practically speaking. She narrowed her eyes. The Hawthorne family is a pain in the ass. That a legal term? Oren asked dryly. I ripped open the envelope and found that the Hawthorne family had indeed provided me with keys somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 of them. Any idea which one of these goes to the front door? I asked. They weren't normal keys. They were oversized and ornately made. They all looked like antiques, and each key was distinct, different designs, different metals, different lengths and sizes. "You'll figure it out," someone said. My gaze jerked upward and I found myself staring at an intercom. "Cut the games, Jameson," Alyssa ordered. "This isn't nearly as cute as you all think it is." No reply. "Jameson," Alyssa tried again. Silence, and then, "I have faith in you, MG." The intercom cut off and Alyssa blew out a long, frustrated breath. "God save me from Hawthornes." "MG?" Libby asked, bewildered. "Mystery Girl," I clarified. "From what I've gathered, that's Jameson Hawthorne's idea of a nickname." I turned my attention to the ring of keys in my hand. The obvious solution was to try them all. Assuming one of these keys opened the front door, I'd get lucky eventually, but luck didn't feel like enough. I was already the luckiest girl in the world. Some part of me wanted to deserve it. I flipped through the keys, inspecting the designs on the handles. An apple, a snake, a pattern of swirls reminiscent of water. There were keys for each letter of the alphabet in fancy, old-fashioned script. There were keys with numbers and keys with shapes, one with a mermaid and 4 different keys featuring eyes. "Well," Alyssa said abruptly, "do you want me to make a phone call?" "No." I turned my attention from the keys to the door. The design was simple, geometric, not a match for anything on any of the keys I'd looked at so far. That would be too easy, I thought. Too simple. A second later, a parallel thought followed. Not simple enough. I'd learned this much playing chess. The more complicated a person's strategy seemed, the less likely an opponent was to look for simple answers. If you could keep someone looking at your knight, you could take them with a pawn. Look past the details, past the complications. I shifted my focus from the handles of the keys to the part that actually went into the lock. Though the keys differed in size overall, the lock end was sized similarly from key to key. Not just sized similarly, I realized, looking at 2 of the keys side by side. The pattern, the mechanism that actually turned the lock was identical between the 2. I moved on to a 3rd key. The same. I began working my way through the ring, comparing each key to the next, one by one. Same, same, same. There weren't 100 keys on this ring. The faster I flipped through them, the surer I was. There were 2 dozens of copies of the wrong key, dressed up to look different from each other, and then this one. I finally hit a key with a different pattern from the others. The intercom crackled, but if Jameson was still on the other side, he didn't say a word. I moved to put the key in the lock, and adrenaline jolted through my veins when it turned. Eureka! "How did you know which key to use?" Libby asked me. The answer came from the intercom. "Sometimes," Jameson Hawthorne said, sounding strangely contemplative, "things that appear very different on the surface are actually exactly the same at their core." Chapter 15, Welcome Home, Avery. Alyssa stepped into the foyer and spun to face me. I stopped breathing just for an instant as I crossed the threshold. It was like stepping into Buckingham Palace or Hogwarts and being told that it was yours. "Down that corridor," Alyssa said. "We have the theater, the music room, conservatory, solarium." I didn't even know what half of those rooms were. "You've seen the great room, of course," Alyssa continued. "The formal dining is farther down, then the kitchen, the chef's kitchen." "There's a chef," I blurted out. "There are sushi, Italian, Taiwanese, vegetarian, and pastry chefs on retainer." The voice that said those words was male. I turned to see the older couple from the Will's reading standing by the entry to the great room. The Laughlins, I remembered. "But my wife handles the cooking day-to-day," Mr. Laughlin continued gruffly. "Mr. Hawthorne was a very private man." Mrs. Laughlin eyed me. "He made do with my cooking most days because he didn't like having any more outsiders poking around in the house than necessary." There was no doubt in my mind that she was saying house with a capital H, and even less that she considered me an outsider. "There are dozens of staff on retainer," Alyssa explained. "They all receive a full-time wage but work on call. If something needs doing, there's someone to do it," Mr. Laughlin said plainly. and I see that it's done in the most discreet fashion possible. More often than not, you won't even know they're here. But I will, Orrin stated. Movement on and off the estate is strictly tracked, and no one makes it past the gates without a deep background check. Construction crews, the housekeeping and gardening staff, every masseuse, chef, stylist, or sommelier, they are all cleared through my team. Sommelier, stylist, chef, masseuse. My brain worked backward through that list. It was dizzying. The gym facilities are down this hall, Alyssa said, returning to her tour guide role. There are full-sized basketball and racquetball courts, a rock-climbing wall, bowling alley, a bowling alley, I repeated. Only 4 lanes, Alyssa assured me, as if it was perfectly reasonable to have a small bowling alley in one's house. I was still trying to formulate an appropriate response when the front door opened behind me. The day before, Nash Hawthorne had given the impression of someone who was out of here, yet there he was. "Motorcycle cowboy," Libby whispered in my ear. Beside me, Alyssa stiffened. "If everything's in order here, I should check in with the firm." She reached into her suit pocket and handed me a new phone. "I programmed in my number, Mr. Laughlin's and Orrin's. If you need anything, call." She left without saying a single word to Nash, and he watched her go. "You be careful with that one," Mrs. Laughlin advised the eldest Hawthorne brother once the door had closed. "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned." That cemented something for me. Alyssa and Nash. My lawyer had advised me against losing my heart to a Hawthorne, and when she'd asked me if I'd ever had my life ruined by one of them and I'd said no, her response had been, "Lucky you." "Don't go convincing yourself Lee is consorting with the enemy," Nash told Mrs. Laughlin. "Avery isn't anyone's enemy. There are no enemies here. This is what he wanted. He, Tobias Hawthorne, even dead, he was larger than life." "None of this is Avery's fault," Libby said beside me. "She's just a kid." Nash swung his attention to my sister, and I could feel her trying to fade into oblivion. Nash peered through her hair to the black eye underneath. "What happened here?" he murmured. "I'm fine," Libby said, sticking her chin out. "I can see that," Nash replied softly, "but if you decide you'd like to give me a name, I'd take it." I could see the effect those words had on Libby. She wasn't used to having anyone but me in her corner. "Libby." Orrin got her attention. "If you've got a moment, I'd like to introduce you to Hector, who will be running point on your detail. Avery, I can personally guarantee that Nash will not axe-murder you or allow you to be axe-murdered by anyone else while I'm gone." That got a snort from Nash, and I glared at Orrin. He didn't have to advertise how little I trusted them. As Libby followed Orrin into the bowels of the house, I became keenly aware of the way that the oldest Hawthorne brother watched her go. "Leave her alone," I told Nash. "You're protective," Nash commented, "and you seem like you'd fight dirty, and if there's one thing I respect, it's those particular traits in combination." There was a crash, then a thud in the distance. "That," Nash said meditatively, "would be the reason I came back and am not living a pleasantly nomadic existence as we speak." Another thud. Nash rolled his eyes. "This should be fun." He began striding toward a nearby hall. He looked back over his shoulder. "You might as well tag along, kid. You know what they say about baptisms and fire." Chapter 16. Nash had long legs, so a lazy amble on his part required me to jog to keep up. I looked in each room as we passed, but they were all a blur of art and architecture and natural light. At the end of a long hall, Nash threw open a door. I prepared myself to see evidence of a brawl. Instead, I saw Grayson and Jameson standing on opposite sides of a library that took my breath away. The room was circular. Shelves stretched up 15 or 20 feet overhead, and every single one was lined completely with hardcover books. The shelves were made of a deep, rich wood. Spread across the room, 4 wrought iron staircases spiraled toward the upper shelves, like the points on a compass. In the library's center, there was a massive tree stump, easily 10 feet across. Even from a distance, I could see the rings marking the tree's age. It took me a moment to realize that it was meant to be used as a desk. I could stay here forever, I thought. I could stay in this room forever and never leave. So, Nash said beside me, casually eyeing his brothers. Whose ass do I need to kick first? Grayson looked up from the book he was holding. Must we always resort to fisticuffs? Looks like I have a volunteer for the first ass-kicking, Nash said, then shot a measuring look at Jameson, who was leaning against one of the wrought iron staircases. Do I have a second? Jameson smirked. Couldn't stay away, could you, big brother? And leave Avery here with you knuckleheads. Until Nash mentioned my name, neither of the other two seemed to have registered my presence behind him, but I felt my invisibility slip away just like that. I wouldn't worry too much about Ms. Grambs, Grayson said, silver eyes sharp. She's clearly capable of taking care of herself. Translation: I'm a soulless, gold-digging con artist, and he sees straight through me. Don't pay any attention to Gray, Jameson told me lazily. None of us do. Jamie, Nash said. Zip it. Jameson ignored him. Grayson is in training for the insufferable Olympics, and we really think he can go all the way if he can just jam that stick a little farther up his asterisk, I thought, channeling Max. Enough, Nash grunted. What did I miss? Xander bounded through the doorway. He was wearing a private school uniform, complete with a blazer that he shed in one liquid motion. You haven't missed anything at all, Grayson told him, and Ms. Grambs was just leaving. He flicked his gaze toward me. I'm sure you want to get settled. I was the billionaire now, and he was still giving orders. Wait a second. Xander frowned suddenly, taking in the state of the room. Were you guys brawling in here without me? I still saw no visible signs of a fight or destruction, but obviously Xander had picked up on something I hadn't. This is what I get for being the one who doesn't skip school, he said mournfully. At the mention of school, Nash looked from Xander to Jameson. No uniform, he noted. Playing hooky, Jamie. 2 ass-kickings it is. Xander heard the phrase ass-kicking, grinned, bounced to the balls of his feet and pounced with no warning, tackling Nash to the ground. Just some friendly impromptu wrestling between brothers. Pinned you, Xander declared triumphantly. Nash hooked his ankle around Xander's leg and flipped him, pinning him to the ground. Not today, little brother. Nash grinned, then flashed a much darker look at the other 2 brothers. Not today. They were the 4 of them a unit. They were Hawthornes. I wasn't. I felt that now in a physical way. They shared a bond that was impervious to outsiders. I should go, I said. I didn't belong here, and if I stayed, all I would do was stare. You shouldn't be here at all, Grayson replied tersely. Stuff a sock in it, Gray, Nash said. What's done is done, and you know as well as I do that if the old man did it, there's no undoing it. Nash swiveled his head toward Jameson. And as for you, self-destructive tendencies aren't nearly as adorable as you think they are. Avery solved the keys, Jameson said casually, faster than any of us. For the first time since I'd walked into the room, all 4 brothers fell into an extended silence. What is going on here? I wondered. The moment felt tense, electric, borderline unbearable, and then you gave her the keys. Grayson broke the silence. I was still holding the key ring in my hand. It suddenly felt very heavy. Jameson wasn't supposed to give me these. We were legally obligated to hand over a key. Grayson interrupted Jameson and started stalking slowly toward him, snapping the book in his hand closed. We were legally obligated to give her a key, Jameson, not the keys. I'd assumed that I was being messed with. At best, I'd thought it was a test, but from the way they were talking, it seemed more like a tradition, an invitation, a rite of passage. I was curious how she'd do. Jameson arched an eyebrow. Do you want to hear her time? No, Nash boomed. I wasn't sure if he was answering Jameson's question or telling Grayson to stop advancing on their brother. Can I get up now? Xander interjected, still pinned beneath Nash and seemingly in a better humor than the other 3 combined. Nope, Nash replied. I told you she was special, Jameson murmured as Grayson continued closing in on him. And I told you to stay away from her. Grayson stopped, just out of Jameson's reach. So I see that you 2 are talking again, Xander commented jollily. Excellent. Not excellent, I thought, unable to draw my eyes away from the storm brewing just feet away. Jameson was taller, Grayson broader through the shoulders. The smirk on the former's face was matched by steel on the latter's. "Welcome to Hawthorne House, mystery girl." Jameson's welcome seemed to be more for Grayson's benefit than for mine. Whatever this fight was about, it wasn't just a difference of opinion on recent events. It wasn't just about me. Stop calling me mystery girl. I'd barely spoken since the moment the library door had swung inward, but I was getting sick of playing spectator. "My name is Avery." "I'd also be willing to call you heiress," Jameson offered. He stepped forward into a beam of light shining down from a skylight above. He was toe-to-toe with Grayson now. "What do you think, Gray? Got a nickname preference for our new landlord?" Landlord. Jameson was rubbing it in like he could handle being disinherited if it meant that the heir apparent had lost everything too. "I'm trying to protect you," Grayson said lowly. "I think we both know," Jameson replied, "that the only person you've ever protected is yourself." Grayson went completely, deathly still. "Xander," Nash stood, pulling the youngest brother to his feet. "Why don't you show Avery to her wing?" That was either Nash's attempt to prevent a line from being crossed or an indication that one already had been. "Come on." Xander bumped his shoulder lightly against mine. "We'll stop for cookies on the way." If that statement was meant to dissipate the tension in the room, it didn't work, but it did draw Grayson's attention away from Jameson for the moment. "No cookies." Grayson's voice was strangled, like his throat was closing down around the words, like Jameson's last shot had cut off his air completely. "Fine," Xander replied cheerily. "You drive a hard bargain, Grayson Hawthorne. No cookies." Xander winked at me. "We'll stop for scones." Chapter 17. The first scone is what I like to call the practice scone. Xander stuffed an entire scone in his mouth, handed one to me, then swallowed and continued lecturing. "It is not until the third, nay, fourth scone that you develop any kind of scone-eating expertise." "Scone-eating expertise," I repeated in a deadpan. "Your nature is skeptical," Xander noted. "That will serve you well in these halls, but if there is one universal truth in the human experience, it is that a finely honed scone-eating palate does not just develop overnight." Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of Orrin and wondered how long he had been tailing us. "Why are we standing here talking about scones?" I asked Xander. Orrin had insisted that the Hawthorne brothers weren't a physical threat, but still. At the very least, Xander should have been trying to make my life miserable. "Aren't you supposed to hate me?" I asked. "I do hate you," Xander replied, happily devouring his third scone. "If you notice, I have kept the blueberry confections for myself and given you," he shuddered, "the lemon-flavored scones. Such is the depth of my loathing for you personally and on principle. This isn't a joke." I felt like I'd fallen into Wonderland and then fallen again, rabbit hole after rabbit hole in a vicious cycle, traps upon traps, I could hear Jameson saying, and riddles upon riddles. "Why would I hate you, Avery?" Xander asked finally. There were layers of emotion in his tone that hadn't been there before. "You aren't the one who did this. Tobias Hawthorne had. Maybe you're blameless." Xander shrugged. "Maybe you're the evil genius that Gray seems to think you are, but at the end of the day, even if you thought that you'd manipulated our grandfather into this, I guarantee that he'd be the one manipulating you." I thought of the letter that Tobias Hawthorne had left me, 2 words, no explanation. "Your grandfather was a piece of work," I told Xander. He picked up a 4th scone. "I agree. In his honor, I eat this scone." He did just that. "Want me to show you to your rooms now?" There's got to be a catch here. Xander Hawthorne had to be more than he appeared. "Just point me in the right direction," I told him. "About that," the youngest Hawthorne brother made a face. "There's a chance that Hawthorne House is just a tiny bit hard to navigate. Imagine, if you will, that a labyrinth had a baby with Where's Waldo. Only Waldo is your rooms." I attempted to translate that ridiculous sentence. "Hawthorne House has an unconventional layout." Xander did away with a 5th and final scone. "Has anyone ever told you that you have a way with words?" Hawthorne House is the largest privately owned residential home in the state of Texas. Xander led me up a staircase. I could give you a number for square footage, but it would only be an estimate. The thing that truly separates Hawthorne House from other obscenely large, castle-like structures isn't so much its size as its nature. My grandfather added at least one new room or wing every year. Imagine, if you will, that an M.C. Escher drawing conceived a child with Leonardo da Vinci's most masterful designs. "Stop," I ordered. "New rule, you're no longer allowed to use any terminology for baby making when describing this house or its occupants, including yourself." Xander brought a hand melodramatically to his chest. "Harsh." I shrugged. "My house, my rules." He gawked at me. I couldn't believe I'd said it either, but there was something about Xander Hawthorne that made me feel like I didn't have to apologize for my own existence. "Too soon?" I asked. "I'm a Hawthorne." Xander gave me his most dignified look. "It's never too soon to start trash talking." He resumed playing the tour guide. "Now, as I was saying, the East Wing is actually the Northeast Wing, located on the second floor. If you get lost, just look for the old man." Xander nodded toward a portrait on the wall. This was his wing these last few months. I'd seen pictures of Tobias Hawthorne online, but once I looked at the portrait, I couldn't look away. He had silver-gray hair and a face more weather-worn than I'd realized. His eyes were Grayson's, almost exactly, his build Jameson's, his chin Nash's. If I hadn't seen Xander in motion, I might not have recognized a resemblance between him and the old man at all, but it was there in the way Tobias Hawthorne's features pulled together, not the eyes or nose or mouth, but something about the shape in between. I never even met him. I tore my eyes from the portrait and looked at Xander. I'd remember if I had. "Are you sure?" Xander asked me. I found myself looking back at the portrait. Had I ever met the billionaire? Had our paths crossed even for a moment? My mind was blank except for one phrase looping through over and over again. "I'm sorry." Chapter 18. Xander left me to explore my wing. My wing. I felt ridiculous even thinking the words. In my mansion. The first 4 doors led to suites, each of them sized to make a king bed look tiny. The closets could have doubled as bedrooms. And the bathrooms. Showers with built-in seats and a minimum of 3 different shower heads apiece. Gargantuan bathtubs that came with control panels. Televisions inlaid in every mirror. Dazed, I made my way to the 5th and final door on my hall. Not a bedroom, I realized when I opened it. An office. Enormous leather chairs, 6 of them sat in a horseshoe shape, facing a balcony. Glass display shelves lined the walls. Evenly spaced on the shelves were items that looked like they belonged in a museum: geodes, antique weaponry, statues of onyx and stone. Opposite the balcony, at the back of the room, was a desk. As I got closer, I saw a large bronze compass built into its surface. I trailed my fingers over the compass. It turned northwest and a compartment in the desk popped open. This wing was where Tobias Hawthorne spent his last few months, I thought. Suddenly, I didn't just want to look in the open compartment, I wanted to rifle through every drawer in Tobias Hawthorne's desk. There had to be something somewhere that could tell me what he was thinking, why I was here, why he'd pushed his family aside for me. Had I done something to impress him? Did he see something in me, or Mom? I got a closer look at the open compartment. Inside, there were deep grooves carved in the shape of the letter T. I ran my fingers across the grooves. Nothing happened. I tested the rest of the drawers. Locked. Behind the desk, there were shelves filled with plaques and trophies. I walked toward them. The first plaque had the words United States of America engraved on a gold background. Underneath them, there was a seal. It took a little more reading of the smaller print for me to realize that it was a patent and not one issued to Tobias Hawthorne. This patent was held by Xander. There were at least a half-dozen other patents on the wall, several world records and trophies in every shape imaginable. A bronze bull rider, a surfboard, a sword. There were medals, multiple black belts, championship cups, some of them national championships for everything from motocross to swimming to pinball. There was a series of 4 framed comic book superheroes I recognized, the kind they made movies about, authored by the 4 Hawthorne grandsons. A coffee table book of photographs bore Grayson's name on the spine. This wasn't just a display. It was practically a shrine to Tobias Hawthorne's ode to his 4 extraordinary grandsons. This made no sense. It didn't make sense that any 4 people, 3 of them teenagers, could have achieved this much. And it definitely didn't make sense that the man who'd kept this display in his office had decided that none of them deserved to inherit his fortune. Even if you thought that you'd manipulated our grandfather into this, I could hear Xander saying, I guarantee that he'd be the one manipulating you. Avery. The second I heard my name, I stepped back from the trophies. Hastily, I closed the compartment I'd released on the desk. In here, I called back. Libby appeared in the doorway. This is unreal, she said. This entire place is unreal. That's one word for it. I tried to focus on the marvel that was Hawthorne House and not on my sister's black eye, but I failed. If possible, the bruising looked worse now. Libby wrapped her arms around her torso. I'm fine, she said when she noticed my stare. It doesn't even hurt that much. Please tell me you're done with him. The words escaped before I could stop them. Libby needed support right now, not judgment, but I couldn't help thinking that Drake had been her ex before. I'm here, aren't I? Libby said. I chose you. I wanted her to choose herself, and I said as much. Libby let her hair fall into her face and turned toward the balcony. She was silent for a full minute before she spoke again. My mom used to hit me. Only when she was really stressed, you know. She was a single mom and things were hard. I could understand that. I tried to make everything easier. I could picture her as a kid getting hit and trying to make it up to the person who hit her. Libby, Drake loved me, Avery. I know he did, and I tried so hard to understand. She was hugging herself harder now. The black polish on her nails looked fresh, perfect. But you were right. My heart broke a little. I didn't want to be. Libby stood there for a few more seconds, then walked over to the balcony and tested the door. I followed, and the 2 of us stepped out into the night air. Down below there was a swimming pool. It must have been heated because someone was swimming laps. Grayson. My body recognized him before my mind did. His arms beat against the water in a brutally efficient butterfly stroke, and his back muscles. I have to tell you something, Libby said beside me. That let me tear my eyes away from the pool and the swimmer. About Drake? I asked. No, I heard something. Libby swallowed. When Oren introduced me to my security detail, I overheard Zara's husband talking. They're running a test, a DNA test. On you. I had no idea where Zara and her husband had gotten a sample of my DNA, but I wasn't entirely surprised. I'd thought it myself. The simplest explanation for including a total stranger in your will was that she wasn't a total stranger. The simplest explanation was that I was a Hawthorne. I had no business watching Grayson at all. If Tobias Hawthorne was your father, Libby managed, then my dad isn't. And if we don't share a dad and we barely even saw each other growing up, don't you dare say we're not sisters, I told her. Would you still want me here? Libby asked me, her fingers rubbing at her choker. If we're not, I want you here, I promised. No matter what. Chapter 19. That night, I took the longest shower of my life. The hot water supply was endless. The glass doors on the shower held in the steam. It was like having my own personal sauna. After drying off with plush, oversized towels, I put on my ratty pajamas and flopped down on what I was pretty sure were Egyptian cotton sheets. I wasn't sure how long I'd been lying there when I heard it, a voice. Pull the candlestick. I was on my feet in an instant, whirling to put my back to the wall. On instinct, I grabbed the keys I'd left on the nightstand in case I needed a weapon. My eyes scanned the room for the person who'd spoken and came up empty. Pull the candlestick on the fireplace, heiress, unless you want me stuck back here. Annoyance replaced my initial fight-or-flight response. I narrowed my eyes at the stone fireplace at the back of my room. Sure enough, there was a candelabra on the mantel. Pretty sure this qualifies as stalking, I told the fireplace, or more accurately, the boy on the other side of it. Still, I could not pull the candlestick. Who could resist something like that? I wrapped my hand around the base of the candelabra. I was met with resistance, and another suggestion came from behind the fireplace. Don't just pull forward, angle it down. I did as I was instructed. The candelabra rotated, and then I heard a click, and the back of the fireplace separated from its floor just by an inch. A moment later, I saw fingertips in the gap, and I watched as the back of the fireplace was lifted up and disappeared behind the mantel. Now at the back of the fireplace there was an opening. Jameson Hawthorne stepped through. He straightened, then returned the candle to its upright position, and the entry he just used was slowly covered once more. Secret passage, he explained unnecessarily. The house is full of them. Am I supposed to find that comforting? I asked him. Or terrifying? You tell me, mystery girl, are you comforted or terrified? He let me sit with that for a moment. Or is it possible that you're intrigued? The first time I'd met Jameson Hawthorne, he was drunk. This time, I didn't smell alcohol on his breath, but I wondered how much he'd slept since the reading of the will. His hair was behaving itself, but there was something wild in his glinting green eyes. You're not asking about the keys. Jameson offered me a crooked little smile. I expected you to ask about the keys. I held them up. This was your doing, not a question, and he didn't treat it like one. It's a little bit of a family tradition. I'm not family. He tilted his head to one side. Do you believe that? I thought about Tobias Hawthorne, about the DNA test that Zara's husband was already running. I don't know. It would be a shame, Jameson commented, if we were related. He spared another smile for me, slow and sharp-edged. Don't you think? What was it with me and Hawthorne boys? Stop thinking about his smile. Stop looking at his lips. Just stop. I think that you already have more family than you can deal with. I crossed my arms. I also think you're a lot less smooth than you think you are. You want something. I'd always been good at math. I'd always been logical. He was here in my room flirting for a reason. Everyone is going to want something from you soon, heiress. Jameson smiled. The question is, how many of us want something you're willing to give? Even just the sound of his voice, the way he phrased things, I could feel myself wanting to lean toward him. This was ridiculous. Stop calling me heiress, I shot back. And if you turn answering my question into some kind of riddle, I'm calling security. That's the thing, mystery girl. I don't think I'm turning anything into a riddle. I don't think I have to. You are a riddle, a puzzle, a game my grandfather asked last. He was looking at me so intently now, I didn't dare look away. Why do you think this house has so many secret passages? Why are there so many keys that don't work in any of the locks? Every desk my grandfather ever bought has secret compartments. There's an organ in the theater, and if you play a specific sequence of notes, it unlocks a hidden drawer. Every Saturday morning from the time I was a kid until the night my grandfather died, he sat my brothers and me down and gave us a riddle, a puzzle, an impossible challenge, something to solve. And then he died. And then Jameson took a step toward me. There was you, me. Grayson thinks you're some master manipulator. My aunt is convinced you must have Hawthorne blood. But I think you're the old man's final riddle, one last puzzle to be solved. He took another step, bringing the two of us that much closer. He chose you for a reason, Avery. You're special, and I think he wanted me to figure out why. I'm not a puzzle. I could feel my heart beating in my neck. He was close enough now to see my pulse. Sure you are, Jameson replied. We all are. Don't tell me that some part of you hasn't been trying to figure us out. Grayson, me, maybe even Xander. Is this all just a game to you? I put my hand out to stop him from advancing farther. He took one last step, forcing my palm to his chest. Everything's a game, Avery Grambs. The only thing we get to decide in this life is if we play to win. He reached up to brush the hair from my face and I jerked back. "Get out," I said lowly. "Use the normal door this time." My entire life, no one had touched me as gently as he had a moment before. "You're angry," Jameson said. "I told you if you want something, ask. Don't come in here talking about how I'm special. Don't touch my face. You are special." Jameson kept his hands to himself, but the heady expression in his eyes never shifted. "And what I want is to figure out why. Why you, Avery?" He took a step back, giving me space. "Don't tell me you don't want to know, too." "I did, of course I did. I'm going to leave this here." Jameson held up an envelope. He laid it carefully on the mantel. "Read it, and then tell me this isn't a game to be won. Tell me this isn't a riddle." Jameson reached for the candelabra, and as the fireplace passage opened once more, he offered a targeted parting shot. "He left you the fortune, Avery, and all he left us is you." Chapter 20. Long after Jameson had disappeared into darkness and the fireplace door had closed, I stood there, staring. Was this the only secret passage into my room? In a house like this one, how could I ever really know that I was alone? Eventually, I moved to take the envelope Jameson had left on the mantel, even though everything in me rebelled against what he had said. I wasn't a puzzle. I was just a girl. I turned the envelope over and saw Jameson's name scrawled across the front. This is his letter, I realized. The one he was given at the reading of the will. I still had no idea what to make of my own letter, no idea what Tobias Hawthorne was apologizing for. Maybe Jameson's letter would clarify something. I opened it and read. The message was longer than mine and made even less sense. "Jameson, better the devil you know than the one you don't, or is it? Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. All that glitters is not gold. Nothing is certain but death and taxes. There but for the grace of God go I don't judge." Tobias Tattersall Hawthorne. By the next morning, I'd memorized Jameson's letter. It sounded like it had been written by someone who hadn't slept in days manic, rattling off one platitude after another. But the longer the words marinated in the back of my brain, the more I began to consider the possibility that Jameson might be right. There's something there in the letters, in Jameson's, in mine, an answer or at least a clue. Rolling out of my massive bed, I went to unplug my phones, plural, from their chargers, and discovered that my old phone had powered down. With some hefty pushes on the power button and a little bit of luck, I managed to cajole it back on. I didn't know how I could even begin to explain the past 24 hours to Max, but I needed to talk to someone. I needed a reality check. What I got was more than 100 missed calls and texts. Suddenly, the reason Alyssa had given me a new phone was clear. People I hadn't spoken to in years were messaging me. People who had spent their lives ignoring me clamored for my attention. Coworkers, classmates, even teachers. I had no idea how half of them had gotten my number. I grabbed my new phone, went online, and discovered that my email and social media accounts were even worse. I had thousands of messages, most of them from strangers. To some people, "You'll be Cinderella." To others, "Marie Antoinette." My stomach muscles tightened. I set both phones down and stood up, my hand going over my mouth. I should have seen this coming. It shouldn't have been a shock to my system at all. But I wasn't ready. How could a person be ready for this? "Avery," a voice called into my room, female and not Libby. "Alyssa," I double-checked before opening my bedroom door. "You missed breakfast," came the reply. Brisk, businesslike, definitely Alyssa. I opened the door. "Mrs. Laughlin wasn't sure what you like, so she made a bit of everything," Alyssa told me. A woman I didn't recognize, early 20s, maybe, followed her into the room carrying a tray. She deposited it on my nightstand, cut a narrow-eyed glance my way, then left without a word. "I thought the staff only came in as needed," I said, turning to Alyssa once the door was closed. Alyssa blew out a long breath. "The staff," she said, "is very, very loyal and extremely concerned right now." That Alyssa nodded to the door was one of the newer hires. "She's one of Nash's." I narrowed my eyes. What do you mean she's one of Nash's? Alice's composure never faltered. Nash is a bit of a nomad. He leaves, he wanders. He finds some hole-in-the-wall place to bartend for a while, and then like a moth to the flame, he comes back usually with one or two hopeless souls in tow. As I'm sure you can imagine, there's plenty of work to be had at Hawthorne House, and Mr. Hawthorne had a habit of putting Nash's lost souls to work. And the girl who was just in here, I asked. She's been here about a year. Alice's tone gave nothing away. She'd die for Nash, most of them would. Are she and Nash? I wasn't sure how to phrase this. Involved? No, Alice said sharply. She took a deep breath and continued. Nash would never let anything happen with someone he had any kind of power over. He has his flaws, a savior complex among them, but he's not like that. I couldn't take the elephant in the room any longer, so I dragged it into the light. He's your ex. Alice's chin rose. We were engaged for a time, she allowed. We were young. There were issues. But I assure you, I have no conflict of interest when it comes to your representation. Engaged. I had to actively try to keep my jaw from dropping. My lawyer had planned to marry a Hawthorne, and she hadn't thought that merited a mention. If you'd prefer, Alice said stiffly, I can arrange for someone else from the firm to work as your liaison. I forced myself to stop gawking at her and tried to process the situation. Alice had been nothing but professional and seemed almost frighteningly good at her job. Plus, given the whole broken engagement thing, she had a reason not to be loyal to the Hawthornes. It's okay, I said. I don't need a new liaison. That got a very small smile out of her. I've taken the liberty of enrolling you at Heights Country Day. Alice moved to the next item on her to-do list with merciless efficiency. It's the school that Xander and Jameson attend. Grayson graduated last year. I'd hoped to have you enrolled and at least partially acclimated before news of your inheritance broke in the press, but we'll deal with the hand we've been dealt. She gave me a look. You're the Hawthorne heiress and you're not a Hawthorne. That's going to draw attention, even at a place like Country Day, where you will be far from the only one with means. Means, I thought. How many ways did rich people have of not saying the word rich? I'm pretty sure I can handle a bunch of prep school kids, I said, even though I wasn't sure of that at all. Alice caught sight of my phones. She squatted down and plucked my old phone from the ground. I'll dispose of this for you. She didn't even have to look at the screen to realize what had happened. What was still happening if the constant, muted buzzing of the phone was any indication. Wait, I told her. I grabbed the phone, ignored the messages, and went for Max's number. I transferred it to my new phone. I suggest you strictly regulate who has access to your new number, Alice told me. This isn't going to die down anytime soon. This, I repeated. The media attention, strangers sending me messages, people who'd never cared about me deciding we were best friends. The students at Country Day will have a bit more discretion, Alice told me, but you need to be prepared. As awful as it sounds, money is power and power is magnetic. You're not the person you were 2 days ago. I wanted to argue that point, but instead, my mind cycled back to Tobias Hawthorne's letter to Jameson, his words echoing in my mind. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Chapter 21, you read my letter. Jameson Hawthorne slid into the back seat of the SUV beside me. Orrin had already given me the rundown on the security features of the car. The windows were bulletproof and heavily tinted, and Tobias Hawthorne had owned multiple identical SUVs for times when decoys were needed. Going to Heights Country Day School apparently wasn't one of them. Xander need a ride? Orrin asked from the driver's seat, catching Jameson's eyes in the mirror. Xan goes to school early on Fridays, Jameson said. Extracurricular activity. In the mirror, Orrin's gaze shifted to me. You okay having company? Was I okay in close quarters with Jameson Hawthorne, who'd stepped out of a fireplace and into my bedroom the night before? He touched my face. It's fine, I told Orrin, squelching the memory. Orrin turned the key in the ignition and then cast a glance back over his shoulder. She's the package, he told Jameson. If there's an incident, you save her first, Jameson finished. He kicked a foot up on the center console and reclined against the door. Grandfather always said Hawthorne males have 9 lives. I can't possibly have burned through more than 5 of mine. Orrin turned back to the front and put the car in drive, and then we were off. Even through the bulletproof windows, I could hear the minor roar that went up when we passed outside the gates. Paparazzi. There'd been at least a dozen before. Now there were twice that number, maybe more. I didn't let myself dwell on that for long. I looked away from the reporters and toward Jameson. Here. I reached into my bag and handed him my letter. I showed you mine, Jameson said, playing the double entendre for all it was worth. You show me yours. Shut up and read, he did. That's it, he asked when he was done. I nodded. Any idea what he's apologizing for? Jameson asked. Any great and anonymous wrongs in your past? 1. I swallowed and broke eye contact. But unless you think your grandfather is responsible for my mom having an extremely rare blood type and ending up way too low on the transplant list, he's probably in the clear. I'd meant that to sound sarcastic, not raw. We'll come back to your letter. Jameson did me the courtesy of ignoring every hint of emotion in my tone, and turn our attention to mine. I'm curious, mystery girl, what do you make of it? I got the feeling that this was another test, a chance to show my worth. Challenge accepted. Your letter is written in Proverbs, I said, starting with the obvious. All that glitters is not gold. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. He's saying that money and power are dangerous. And the first line, better the devil you know than the one you don't, or is it? That's obvious, right? His family was the devil that Tobias Hawthorne had known, and I was the devil he hadn't. But if that's true, why me? If I was a stranger, how had he chosen me? A dart on a map, Max's imaginary computer algorithm. And if I was a stranger, why was he sorry? Keep going, Jameson prompted. I focused. Nothing is certain but death and taxes. It sounds to me like he knew he was going to die. We didn't even know he was sick, Jameson murmured. That hit close to home. Tobias Hawthorne had apparently been a champion at keeping secrets, like my mother. I could be the devil he doesn't know, even if he knew her. I would still be a stranger, even if she wasn't. I could feel Jameson beside me, watching me in a way that made me wonder if he could see straight inside my head. There but for the grace of God go I said, returning to the letter's contents, intent on following this to the end. With different circumstances, any of us could have ended up in anyone else's position, I translated. The rich boy can become a pauper. Jameson took his feet down from the center console and turned his head wholly toward me, his green eyes catching mine in a way that made my entire body go to high alert. And the girl from the wrong side of the tracks can become a princess. A riddle, an heiress, a game. Jameson smiled. If this was a test, I'd passed. On the surface, he told me, it appears that the letter outlines what we already know. My grandfather died and left everything to the devil he didn't know, thereby reversing the fortune of many. Why? Because power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. I couldn't have looked away from him if I'd tried. And what about you, heiress? Jameson continued. Are you incorruptible? Is that why he left the fortune in your hands? The expression playing at the corners of his lips wasn't a smile. I wasn't sure what it was exactly, other than magnetic. I know my grandfather. Jameson stared at me intently. There's more here, a play on words, a code, a hidden message, something. He handed my letter back. I took it and looked down. Your grandfather signed my letter with initials. I offered up one last observation. And yours with his full name. And what, Jameson said lightly, do we make of that? We. How had a Hawthorne and I become a we? I should have been wary. Even with Orrin's assurances and Alice's, I should have been keeping my distance. But there was something about this family, something about these boys. Almost there. Orrin spoke from the front seat. If he'd been following our conversation, he gave no sign of it. The Country Day administration has been briefed on the situation. I signed off on the school's security years ago when the boys enrolled. You should be fine here, Avery, but do not under any circumstances leave the campus. Our car pulled past a guarded gate. I won't be far. I turned my mind from the letters Jameson's and mine to what awaited me outside this car. This is a high